Good morning. I now convene the August 2nd and 3rd, 2018 meeting of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. Will the recording secretary please call the roll?
Kathleen Alavi, Kirsten Barnes, Catherine Williams-Brown, C. Michael Cooney, Lena Darling-Hammond,
Present.
Marisol Escobedo, Jose Gonzalez, Makita Guino-Shire, Johanna Hartwig, Alicia Hine, Bonnie Clark, Calvin Quinn, Jane Marks, Monica Martinez, Castle Redmond, Ade Rodriguez, Tina Sloan, Christine Zappo, Michelle Zuma. We have a quorum.
And Marisol Escobedo is here. Okay, and since you are here, Commissioner Escobedo, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we have two new members that I am pleased to introduce. Johanna Hartwig first became interested in education policy when she served as her high school's school board representative in the Livermore Valley Unified School District. Through her early board service, Ms. Hartwig's understanding of the challenges and opportunities faced by the California public school system deepened and expanded, as did her appreciation for the teachers, administrators, and board members who support the system. Ms. Hartwig built on her California education by attending Yale University, where she earned an undergraduate degree in history. After working for a number of years in New York City, she then earned a law degree and a public policy degree from the University of Michigan. In graduate school, Johanna took a particular interest in classes addressing education reform and equity issues. She served as a student attorney on child welfare cases through the school's law clinic. Ms. Hartwig also planned to return to the West Coast and did so after graduate school. She worked as a practicing attorney in corporate litigation for two international law firms based in San Francisco. Johanna also served as a law clerk for a judge on the Federal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, good court, and simultaneously as the judge's ethics clerk for the Federal Judiciary's Ethics Committee. You will be helpful to us. Ms. Hartwig currently serves as the Assistant Dean for Career Planning and Legal Community Engagement at the University of San Francisco School of Law, which is one of the most diverse law schools in the country. She is serving as our public representative. Let's welcome Johanna. Yeah. And Janie Marks, over here on the other side of the table, currently teaches at the Alice Burney Waldorf Public School in Sacramento. She helped create, implement, and sustain a model of Waldorf education in the public school sector. This is a really important innovation. She has served on the board for the Alliance of Waldorf Public Schools and served on the committee to align Waldorf curriculum goals with California Common Core standards. Ms. Marks has worked as a mentor and teacher educator in a variety of programs within the public Waldorf school movement. In this work, her focus has been in the areas of diversity, child development, and curriculum. She has been a California public school teacher for 25 years. Prior to teaching, she worked in the field of environmental education, serving inner-city youth and their families as a YMCA program director. She has also served in the homeless population as an employee at Loaves and Fishes in Sacramento. Ms. Marks is a longtime resident of the state and has either attended or worked for California public education institutions since kindergarten. That's quite a record. She earned a BA in anthropology at the University of California at Los Angeles and her multiple subject teaching credential at Cal State University San Bernardino. She is serving as a teacher representative. And welcome, Janie. We're excited to have both of these new members to the commission and a lot to do in these next couple of days. So you'll learn that your introduction is a little bit like immersion strategy. So anytime you have a question, don't hesitate to talk to your neighbor or catch up with one of us. Item 1A is the approval of the June 2018 minutes. We will need to make two separate motions to approve the ad hoc committee and regular session minutes. I'd like to remind everyone that only those who served on each committee can make and second the motion to approve the committee minutes and also to vote on your committee minutes. Do I have a motion from a member of the ad hoc committee, and that would include Commissioners Klatt, Kung, and Cooney, to approve the June 2018 ad hoc committee minutes? Thank you, Commissioner Cooney. May I have a second? Commissioner Kung, thank you. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All right, all in favor, the three of you can vote. Say aye. All opposed? Actually, there's only two of you who can vote right now. Anybody opposed? Okay, your motion carries. A success to start the day. Next, do I have a motion to approve the June 2018 commission minutes? Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Hine. Do I have a second? Wake up, people. Commissioner Zuma. Discussion. Any discussion of the minutes? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Oh, did you have something? You can abstain when I ask about abstentions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay.
Abstention for Friday, June 15th.
Okay.
Also abstaining for Friday.
Okay. Okay, so did you go, whoever's taking charge, you got all that? Good. The motion carries. The next item is 1B, approval of the August 2018 agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the June 2018 agenda? Commissioner Martinez, thank you. And do I have a second? Commissioner Hind. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item 1C is approval of the August 2018 consent calendar. Do commissioners have any items they would like to have considered in closed session? Commissioner Hind? Okay, I'll come back to you. Commissioner Escobedo?
I have two. Number 24, Deborah L. Hild, and number 25, Eric Rodney Irigoyen.
Okay, any others that, Commissioner Cooney?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have these myself, but Commissioner Klatt asked me to pull items 31 and 33. 31 is Laskowski, 33 is Lockey.
Okay, any others? Can we? Okay.
Number 16, Liliana Garcia.
Okay. All right. Are you good with us going ahead? All right. With those set aside, do I have a motion to approve all the remaining items on the consent calendar? Okay, Commissioner Rodriguez. And do I have a second? Commissioner De La Torre Escobedo. Get it all in. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. And now we'll move to the Executive Director's report. No.
Good morning, Commissioners, and Happy New Year. It is the start of the school year for many of us, and the start of a new fiscal year for all of us, so always exciting to begin anew. So a couple things. First of all, in the budget, as you probably have seen in the press, the Commission has an allocation of $125 million to support grants for the recruitment of special education teachers, and some STEM teachers as well. $75 million of those dollars is focused on the development of residencies or the expansion of existing residencies to bring special education teachers and STEM teachers into teaching teaching and bilingual. Yes, but thank you. And $50 million is designated for local solutions grants to support LEAs as they work to recruit special education teachers, and it gives them a fair amount of flexibility about how they might go about doing that, from forgivable loans to other kinds of incentives to bring new teachers into the work. So we're very excited to have this opportunity to support the state in developing a stronger and larger special education core. So that's work that we're getting off the ground just now. Secondly, I want to let you know that Autumn, our student liaison, is not here. She asked us to share a message. She will serve as the student liaison through September. She started full-time teaching at Montgomery High School as a 9th grade English co-teacher and English 9 fundamentals teacher.
Great.
Just what she wanted, exactly. So she says that she's sorry to miss the meeting, but she's looking forward to September. She's currently at work teaching her students and advocating for students on her caseload. She's talking to their teachers to create new goals for their individual education programs to ensure the students get the accommodations and modifications they need. She's also communicating with families. She has 3 IEP meetings next week, and she asked us to wish her luck. So that's where Autumn is. And with that in mind, the opportunity to nominate students, a new student liaison, is open until August the 10th. There's a link for that, and we will make sure you all have it. But we have had 1 application thus far, so we're hoping that we get a nice crop to select a new student liaison from. And finally, I'm thrilled to welcome our 2 new commissioners. There's a 3rd new commissioner who will be here at our next meeting. That's Kathy Olivey. She's a school board member down in Orange County. And with those 3 appointments, we have a full commission. It's been a while. I think there may have been 1 or 2 meetings in the last 7 years at which we had a full commission, and that'll change things. We're working on the seating arrangements, make sure we have room at the table for everyone, and that's a great thing. So happy meeting to all, and that concludes my report.
Maybe.
I have one for Commissioner Barnes, who couldn't be here today. Let me read it to you. She says, as the PPS Credential Committee Workgroup Liaison, I am sorry I could not be at the meeting to hear the update and feedback on the work done so far. Today is my first day back, and we have schedules to fix and new students to enroll. The feedback we received from the first survey was helpful, and we look forward to more. Each group is very dedicated and passionate about the work we are doing and very cognizant of the importance of it. Thank you to the CTC staff for all your work and support.
Yes. Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here representing the State Board of Education. So I was thinking as I was flying up here about the important things to share with you that impact teacher preparation, leader preparation, pre-service, then once we're in the field, and then through our life career in different stages. And so I want to focus a bit about where we are in curricular frameworks, where we are in assessments, and where we are in accountability, because I think those things would be thoughtful and helpful. First, as you know, we have a process where we approve new standards, then we adopt a framework, then we give that information to the publisher, then the publishers do review, have about a year to develop materials. So last month, we just reviewed 35 new programs for the next generation science standards. It's been a long time in coming. I don't think we've had new standards and materials in 20 years. And people are excited. They've been teaching for a while, but it won't go to the board until November, but by mid-year, districts will begin to start reviewing science materials. So as you think about teacher science preparation, it's a significant shift from what we've done before. And we also have an assessment that we're working on as well in science. So I thought I would bring up science as an important issue to be aware of as well. We're also just about done with our public comments on health. So there'll be a new health framework coming forward. There's quite a lot of things in the health framework that are progressive and new and aligned to legislation. So be aware that's coming. And right behind that, we're starting to work on an ethnic studies framework, a world language, and then we'll be updating visual and performing arts. So I just thought important to know. Also, we will be adopting new computer science standards, which is really significant for California. We haven't done that before. They've been working with an advisory commission. It's really important to think about how that impacts our changing the future of what our students will face as they go out into and how we need to prep them. So I thought that would be important to know. In assessment, we have some issues that we've been identifying in assessment, so not surprising, and accountability, that special education is a high priority for us in the state. More than half the districts that were identified for needing technical assistance, more than half, were identified for special education. And so that's really a rate. I know we've talked here at the Credentialing Commission about teacher preparation and serving special ed kids, but just wanted to reinforce that together we all share that need to really rethink how we support special ed. Also, mathematics is a big issue for us statewide. We're not achieving at as high a level as we would hope mathematics-wise, and so we're looking at how we build capacity, how we support teachers, because that's the first impact in the classroom, and secondly, how we support leaders, because that's the second impact, is how leaders support their teachers in the school and in the district as well. In our accountability system, we did align with ESSA. You might have followed that. It took us several meetings and a lot of negotiations. So a few things that are different. We're looking, obviously another priority in the state is English learners, and we have a way to recognize in districts how English learners are doing and when they are reclassified. That was in our measure, but the feds required us to pull out the reclass in the identification, although told us once it was approved we could go back for a waiver. But English learners is a high priority for us, and we have an ability on our dashboard now to be able to show where English learners are, and we're going to be able to show how long they've been in the system before if they were reclassified or not reclassified. And with that, I remember when Terry was showing us the CTC dashboard, so we had some money in the governor's budget, and the dashboard's been under redesign, and people seem to really like the new prototype. It won't be out until November, but it's much easier. It's easier to understand. The tiles are easy to navigate for parents and for staff, and so that is coming, that will be able to really show sort of how the accountability system is, and then there'll be data reports easily linked, so people can find the support, not only how a grade level is doing, but how individual subgroups are doing. And then finally, if you're in a district or in an area where you support high schools, we have a college and career indicator. It's really important that all of our students be college and career ready, so there's a lot of work in career tech, and we had that combined in a measure. So the feds had us pull out the 11th grade academics, so which had been a question for us, is did we want to report it twice? So where you see 3 through 8th grade math and English, you'll now see 11th grade as well. And so that'll be part of our new reporting system that's required. The last thing I would say is on accountability, we really believe that if schools need support, the district has a responsibility for that. So in our state system, we identify local education agencies that have needs, and then we expect the district to support along with counties or whoever they're going to use to support their schools. Well, the feds are requiring us to also identify the lowest performing schools, which we will do, but we won't provide different support than we're providing to the district. We still expect the district to provide the support and be involved in that. That school can't sit out there all by itself. And finally, we've been working hard on our system of support. So how do you support struggling districts? So many of you in your different roles, either in a district or at a higher ed institution, support particular needs, and English learners and mathematics school districts look to us for assistance. So we're working on our system of support as far as what a local district does, what a county does, what we do statewide, what nonprofits would support. And so just as you talk about multi-tiered systems of support for students, what you do for all, what you do for some, and what you do for a few, we're doing that also, what we do for all districts, what we do for some, and what we do for a few. So we're trying to stay really coherent, but it's a lot of stuff on the table, a lot of things for districts to pay attention to and for teachers to pay attention to. So we're trying to keep consistent and coordinated. So it's around instruction, how we assess it, and then how we provide support for those that need it. So hopefully that's helpful. And if you have some higher ed classes that you're preparing, I think the Department of Ed has a wonderful website. We're the most current
frameworks are posted, and I think we want to make sure that those are in our courses so that our teachers are coming out prepared and understand all the new standards. Thanks.
I think one of the things that's been so helpful to us over the last few years is being able to work in tandem with the state board, and we can see how much progress is being made on all these agendas. Are there any other liaisons with reports to make? Okay. I think I can now recess the general session. This may be a record. And move to the Educator Preparation Committee. Commissioner Rodriguez will chair the committee due to Commissioner Gonzalez's absence. Commissioner Rodriguez, will you please convene the committee?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'd like to call the August 2018 meeting of the Educator Preparation Committee to order. We have 6 items. 5 of the items are scheduled for today, with 1 more tomorrow morning. And our first item is 2A, initial institutional approval. We're at stage 3, consideration of provisional approval for Burton School District. Lynette Roby is presenting this action item. Ms. Roby, will you begin? Or we can settle in, and then Ms. Roby, will you begin?
So I'm going to use my notes here, sorry. Okay, so before we begin, staff wanted to take a moment and acknowledge that we have some new commission members, and so we decided to kind of go through the initial institutional approval process and summarize it a bit, just do a brief summary of all of the stages, just to refresh everyone's memory as well as inform the new commission members. It is, I'm sorry, is that better? Okay. So we're going to summarize each stage of the initial institutional approval process to sort of refresh and inform the new commission members about the initial institutional approval process and all the stages involved. So in an effort to strengthen the initial institutional approval process in which institutions become eligible to offer educator preparation programs in California, the Commission redesigned and adopted the current initial institutional approval process, and that occurred in 2016. On the slide that you see, what we have done is you will notice that there are 5 stages, and that every stage must be completed in order to become an approved program sponsor in California, eligible to offer educator preparation programs. Stage 1 is when the institution completes its prerequisites. The prerequisites include attendance at Accreditation 101, as well as the submission of either an institution must indicate whether they are WASC approved, or if they are a public school or a charter school, they must have approval of the board. So we have to have that in place. Staff reviews that, and if everything is fine with that, then they move to stage 2. And I want to take a second and just explain what Accreditation 101 is. Accreditation 101 is a day-long training for institutions who are interested in becoming eligible to offer educator preparation programs in California. The training covers every aspect of the process, and the institution must bring with them a full team, a full complement, and that team usually includes a unit head, or must include the unit head, the fiscal officer, directors or coordinators of the program, and also a partner from an institution other than their own, an education institution other than their own. And they have to have all of those in order to have completed that Accreditation 101 requirement. So once they have once they have completed stage 1, the institution then can move on to stage 2. And as you can see on the slide, stage 2 is when eligibility requirements are submitted. An institution would then submit the 12 eligibility requirements. The 12 criteria required, not only include narrative responses, but also include evidence. And evidence such as grievance policy, a mission statement, a vision statement, just to name a few. That's just a part of what's included in those 12 eligibility criteria. At this stage, it should be noted that no information is provided about the program. There's nothing about faculty. There's nothing about curriculum. That all comes in stage 3. And you can see that stage 3 is highlighted. It's highlighted on the slide because that's what we're going to talk about today. The 2 institutions coming before you are actually they're bringing forward stage 3 and the documentation for that. Although the Commission may approve the eligibility requirements in stage 2, this does not mean that that institution is eligible to offer the educator preparation program at that point. They still have to complete stage 3 and move into stage 4. As you can see on the slide, they move to stage 3 if they're approved in stage 2, and at stage 3 they submit common standards, all preconditions, and program standards. And at stage 3, the information provided does include things such as program design, curriculum, faculty information, supervision information, assessment information. So all that comes forward in stage 3. The common standards and program standards submitted in stage 3 are reviewed by 2 Board of Institutional Reviewers. That means that the common standards have a team of 2 BIR, or Board of Institutional Reviewers, as well as does the program standards. The preconditions are reviewed by staff. I want to take just a second for those of you who don't know what Board of Institutional Reviewers are. They are education professionals who are interested in participating in accreditation activities, such as the review of common standards or the review of program standards. They also sometimes serve, or oftentimes serve, on accreditation site visit teams. They are trained. There is a training that we offer that they come to, and then they are considered Board of Institutional Reviewers. Once the common standards have been reviewed and the preconditions have been reviewed, and all of these are found to be aligned or met, the documents once again come before the Commission. And you can see on the slide we've highlighted what documents come before the Commission, and that is in yellow font. So the common standards preconditions come before the Commission. The staff makes a recommendation. Commission considers that, and if the institution is approved in stage 3, they receive provisional approval. Again, provisional approval does not mean that they can offer the program at that point. They are approved to offer a program, but the program standards have not been brought before the Committee on Accreditation at that point. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Provisional approval normally lasts 2 to 3 years. What that does is it provides the institution enough time to have one cohort of candidates go through their program, and so that's the reasoning for that 2 to 3 years. The program standards are then reviewed by another team of Board of Institutional Reviewers. Since the institution has received provisional approval in stage 3, the program standards go before the Committee on Accreditation. And once the Committee on Accreditation approves those program standards, at that point the institution is eligible to offer that program. And you'll see in stage 4 that that's where the program standards and the COA approval. And that 2 to 3 years begins, and they can offer the program for 2 to 3 years. Now, at the end of that 2 to 3 years, the institution then hosts a site visit, data is collected, and again, a report is presented to the Commission, and the Commission then considers that institution for full approval. Full approval means if you give them full approval, then they actually become a part of the accreditation system, and they are subject to participate in all of the accreditation activities as defined by the accreditation cycle. So those are the 5 stages. That's a very brief summary. and hopefully that will make clear what we're about to present. So they've been sitting here quietly, and I'm signed out, so I'm gonna have to work with notes. Okay. Sorry. So now that we've summarized the 5 stages, I'd like to focus on stage 3 and begin with Burton School District. In stage 2A, we are happy to bring before you stage 3 of the initial institutional approval process for Burton School District. And with us we have Alexandra Aiello, I hope I said that right, Teacher Induction Coordinator, Treasurer Weisenberger, and she is the Director of Human Resources, and Debbie Estrada, Executive Director of Human Resources at Burton School District. Thank you for coming. And they will be available to answer any questions about the program. Burton School District has submitted all of the required preconditions, including 2 initial preconditions and the program preconditions. The review of the preconditions submitted by Burton School is completed by staff, and Burton School's preconditions have been found to have been met. On page 4 of the item, you will find a summary of the responses to the preconditions, and the full precondition document is available in attachment A of this item. I'd like to highlight just a couple of the 2 initial program preconditions, which are demonstration of need and practitioners' participation in program design. That's a mouthful. In response to demonstration of need, Burton School District noted that it currently partners with Tulare County Office of Education, but Tulare County Office of Education is 35 miles away. Burton School feels that offering their own induction program would provide its candidates easier access to district support and staff, and would provide Burton School the opportunity to address recruitment and retention of teachers in their rural school district. At this time, 26 Burton School teachers have attended the Tulare County Induction Program. They anticipate numbers of teachers needing induction over the next 2 years to be 27 for 2018-19 and 30 for 19-20. In response to initial precondition 2, which is the practitioner participation in program design, Burton School District is involving a variety of practitioners in its program design and will continue to do so. Burton has already established a teacher induction program advisory committee. The purpose of the committee is to ensure that the proposed induction program faithfully meets program standards and that it is being implemented effectively. The committee includes the Director of Human Resources, the new Teacher Support and Development Coordinator, the Academic Technology Coordinator, representatives from institutions of higher education, the site administrators, elementary and secondary support providers, and candidates, and a union representative. The remaining preconditions are specific to the requirements of the teacher induction program that they wish to offer, and those were all found to have been responded to appropriately. Burton School also submitted responses to the common standards, which were reviewed by the team of 2 Board of Institutional Reviewers. The team collaborated and came to consensus on the final findings of aligned for all of the common standards. A summary of Burton's responses to the common standards is included in the document, and a summary, the full report is included as Appendix B. Attachment B, I'm sorry. Based on the findings of met for all preconditions and aligned for the common standards, staff recommends that the Commission grant provisional approval to Burton School District. If it is recommended that provisional approval be for a period of 3 years, so that in the 3rd year a site visit can occur and data can be collected, upon which a report would come back to you, the Commission, for consideration of full approval. With that, staff is available to answer any questions about the process, and we have representatives here from Burton who will be happy to answer any program questions.
Chair Darling Hammond? Oh. Co-Chair Hine?
Good morning. There. I just had a couple comments in reading through your plan, things that stood out to me that I really appreciated, and I just wanted to highlight some of those. I like the part where you talked about being dedicated to forming an entire staff that supports the new teachers, not just the mentor matched up with the teacher. Just having the HR, the administration, everyone really supporting, so that was a huge plus. Your commitment to funding the program, and not just the program, but all the resources that the new teachers need to be successful. So again, the bigger picture, not just the mentor, but also all the things that they might need, the resources. And finally, that the work that the new teacher does during the induction program, not to be used for evaluation or employment, but really to help that teacher become a stronger teacher and identifying their specific needs. So I thought those were all really positive pieces that you put in there, and things you didn't have to put in there, but that you did, and I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other commissioner comments? Chair Darling Hammond?
I'll just add in that spirit that it's a very strong application, and we look forward to seeing your induction program unfold.
Thank you. There are no public comments for this item, and this is an action item. Do I have a motion to either grant provisional approval to Burton School District and set the provisional approval to be 3 years, or deny provisional approval? Okay. Okay, we have a motion to grant provisional approval to Burton School District by Commissioner Hine. Do I see a second?
A second.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Martinez. We have a second. Now we'll open it up for votes. And let's see. Any further discussion? No? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
We drove all that way. I was looking at them on the map. I'm like, where are they? They're by Bakersfield. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Item 2B is also initial institutional approval, stage 3, consideration of provisional approval for Atwater Elementary School District. And this is an action item. Lynette Roby is presenting this item. And by the way, Ms. Roby, thank you so much for that wonderful overview for the new commissioners. That was fabulous. And when we say old, we're talking about time on the commission. Youthful time. Okay, Ms. Roby, will you begin, please?
I have my computer back, so I'm much more comfortable. In item 2B, staff again is pleased to bring before you stage 3 of the initial institutional approval process for Atwater Elementary School District. This is for your consideration and possible provisional approval as we are again in stage 3. At the table, we have Deborah Mitchell, Program Coordinator, and Diana Heller. And they will be here to answer any program questions that you might have. Atwater Elementary School District has submitted all of the required preconditions, including the 2 initial program preconditions and all of the program-specific preconditions. The review of the preconditions submitted by Atwater Elementary was completed by staff, and they have been found to have been met. On page 4 of the the item, there is a brief summary of responses to the preconditions, and again, the full preconditions are included as attachment A of the item. As in the previous items, staff would like to briefly focus on two of the initial program preconditions, which is need, demonstration of need, and practitioner participation in program design. In response to demonstration of need, Atwater Elementary School District reports that as a small rural Central California town, their schools have traditionally been difficult to staff and have suffered from high rates of teacher attrition. Atwater currently partners with Merced Union High School for their induction program, and Merced program in 2017-18 school year Atwater had, I don't have the number. I'm sorry. They had 41 non-permanent employees who do not have clear credentials, and they anticipate that those people will be needing induction in the next 2 to 3 years, which would take them up to 2020. They had 27. I'm sorry, I did have the number. I just missed it. They had 27 in Merced Union High School in 2017-18. So they anticipate that that number will grow. In response to the second initial precondition, practitioner participation in program design, Atwater Elementary states that practitioners have been and will continue to be involved in the design of the program. An advisory council has already been formed consisting of the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services, the Program Coordinator, the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, current mentors, a site administrator, and 2 recent program participants. The Advisory Council is planned to meet quarterly. The remaining preconditions are specific to the requirements of teacher induction, and Atwater has submitted the appropriate assurances and responses to all of those preconditions. Atwater School District, Elementary School District, has also submitted responses to the common standards, which were reviewed again by a team of 2 Board of Institutional Reviewers. The team again collaborated, and they did come to consensus on the final finding of aligned for all of the common standards. Again, a summary is provided for you on page 10 of the common standards, and a full document can be found as attachment B to the item. So based on the findings of met for the preconditions and aligned for the common standards, staff would like to recommend provisional approval for Atwater Elementary School District. And again, it is recommended that the provisional approval be for a period of 3 years so that, again, in the 3rd year, a site visit can occur and data can be collected, after which a report would be completed and brought before the Commission for consideration of full approval, which is, again, stage 5 of the institutional approval process. And with that, staff is available to answer any process questions again, and we do have the representatives here from Burton Elementary School District to answer program questions.
Thank you. Atwater. See no public comment cards. The public comment period is closed for this item now, and I would like to open it up for the commissioners. If you have any questions, concerns that you'd like to communicate? Okay.
This is more of a comment than a concern. I'm really appreciative of your addressing the issue of so many people being not having the being non-permanent employees. But in addition, particularly glad to see that a TK8 group would pull together in your advisory committee to include recent participants is essential, and I'm glad you already have that in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Commissioners? Okay, so we will, this is also an action item. And do I have a motion to either grant provisional approval to Atwater Elementary School District and set the provisional approval period for 3 years, or deny provisional approval? Okay, thank you. Motion made by Commissioner Zuma. Do I have a second? Okay, all right. Well, Commissioner Kung, get you next time around. All right. So I have a motion, and any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you so much, Ms. Roby, and congratulations, Atwater. Right. Yeah, like I'm in a little bit of shock. Right.
That's true.
Presented by Amy Rising. This is an information item. Ms. Rising, will you please begin?
Wayne Baser, I'm a TPA consultant here with the Commission.
Good morning, Commissioners. Nicole Amador with Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson.
Good morning. I'm John Twing. I'm responsible for Pearson's Global Assessment Services.
It's for the California Teaching Performance Assessment that we call the CalTPA. And particularly, we're going to focus on the work that was completed in the prior year of 17-18, the past year, and discuss some of those findings with you, as well as talk with you about the work to come. So while we have accomplished a great deal really in the last 3 years, we have quite a bit more of work ahead of us. But we wanted to be able to present this to you and have a discussion. So this is an information-only item. First, I wanted to go over some of the key reasons as to why we even embarked on this endeavor. So as you all know, so many of the expectations that we have for our students in California have changed. Common Core has been with us now for quite a while, and next generation science standards are now ready for all to use. And because of those expectations changing, we really needed to think about what it was that teachers needed to know and be able to do, and therefore be able to demonstrate in a performance assessment before they receive their initial preliminary credential to teach. Secondly, we needed to make sure that the Commission's approved TPA model was centrally scored. So up until this time, there was a lot of local scoring going on, a great deal of work in the field itself at the program level with faculty and those who support teachers. But that also led to potential differences in score results across the state, so we needed to move to a centralized scoring system in this next revision, and so we have done that. And then that way we will be more assured of being able to produce consistent and reliable data that can be used a little more broadly as we think about the impact across the state and from program to program as we support candidates to become teachers. And then finally, it was really important that we also began to require that our assessors score in their content area of expertise. So credentialed science secondary teachers will only score science secondary submissions, and multiple subjects teachers will score multiple subjects, et cetera, so that we can again make sure that we are providing the most specific and detailed information back to candidates given their content area that they would like to become a teacher in. So for all of those reasons, we have spent the last 2 years digging into and redeveloping the Commission's model. So back in December of 2015, we redeveloped and you adopted the assessment design standards, and a lot of those properties have driven all of our decisions over the last several years. We were then also asked to identify a design team of 21 educators from around California that were approved by the executive director, and they have been working diligently with us for 2 years and have really done an amazing job and really committed huge amounts of time to this effort. And we just had our last meeting with them a week ago and celebrated all of that work. And then also in 2016, we identified our technical contractor evaluation systems group of Pearson, and they're with us today, and they have been working night and day pretty much, and most weekends with us to get this work done. Along the way, we had a couple of other contractors that worked with us. So HUMRO, which is short for Human Resources Research Organization, helped us with our early validity work. And then also the California State University helped us with our focus group efforts to survey candidates and programs about the impacts of this work at both the pilot and field test stages. And then also the Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity SCALE worked with us early on to help us really think through rubrics and what it was that we were measuring. So lots of support, lots of folks involved. As we moved along through the last couple of years, we were able to move through a pilot test, and then we wrapped up our field study test this past couple of months, and I'll be speaking mostly about the field study. But in the item, we also have some pilot study findings so that we can kind of see the whole trajectory. I do want you to know that in the pilot, we had 24 institutions and 250 candidates, and as we move forward to the field test, we grew to 875 registrants with 851 submissions, but you have to times that by 2 because we have 2 cycles, so really 1,702 submissions that were scored in our field test. So fairly robust opportunity to study what was going on and work with the field. So coming back to our field test, all the programs that did work with us had to apply for a waiver from you, and you approved their participation. And we also had an established performance threshold that candidates had to meet. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that threshold is as we get into the item. So basically, this item is in 3 parts. The first really looks at the pilot outcomes and the summary of the field test findings. The second highlights the features that have evolved from this work so that you can have an understanding of what this assessment is trying to offer candidates and programs in the state. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about ongoing supports that we need to put in place, because really now the true work is beginning. Implementation of performance assessments is a lot more complex than actually designing the assessment itself. So we are embarking on lots of support for programs and candidates as we move into this first administration. All right, so in this first part of the item, what you have is information about that pilot and field test. I'm going to quickly kind of go over the pilot and spend more time on the field test. But I do want to pause for a second and talk again about our design team members and the effort and true support they provided to this effort. And they met with us 12 times over the last several years in person for 2-day meetings and then 1-day meetings and online often to provide lots of support and feedback. We had some additional panels of educators also involved as we moved along. We pulled together our content expert panels as we started really thinking about the fact that we wanted to be very much more subject specific, and we have subject specific teaching performance expectations. So we went back to those expectations and asked these experts to tell us what really was the most expected kinds of performances around these content-specific performance expectations for beginning candidates, and they helped us identify that, and those are now part of how we train assessors and think about the assessments. And then we also had the Commission Standing Bias Review Committee review this work multiple times, and they will review it one more time in August before we actually launch to make sure that we are not bringing in, unintended bias in any way by the words we're using or the way we've set up prompts and questions in the rubrics. So all of that work has taken place. So in this redevelopment of the CalTPA, we ended up with 2 instructional cycles. We ended up with asking candidates to follow the plan, teach, assess, reflect, and apply cycle. And candidates, as they move through these embedded assessments, which are embedded in their actual clinical experiences, their work in the classroom with students and other teachers around them and the administration, come through these cycles, prepare evidence that is sort of a natural harvest of things that teachers actually do, and they submit that work, and it gets scored centrally and online. The candidates will take these cycles at 2 different times in their experience so that they can get formative feedback as they're moving forward. So it doesn't all come to them at the end of their experience, but comes to them along the way so that they can submit cycle 1, get feedback, get coaching, and then engage in cycle 2, and again, get feedback and coaching before they leave their program, because they will need to pass both of these cycles in order, and their program and their clinical practice, in order to be awarded for that initial credential. So cycle 1 is asking a candidate to identify a classroom of students, to prepare and plan for one lesson. So they first start by learning deeply about the context and the children in that classroom and their needs and their assets. What do the students bring into the classroom? What do they already know? How do we build off prior knowledge and then support instruction moving forward? And then they teach the lesson, they reflect on the lesson, and they think about what next steps are for them instructionally based on what they've learned from that one lesson. Instructional cycle 2 is a little more complex. It's about assessment-driven instruction. In this case, we ask a candidate to identify multiple lessons, a learning segment, we call it, that is probably drawn from a larger unit of instruction, and to look carefully then at planning those lessons, and inside of those lessons, several types of assessment, so that the candidate is thinking about multiple measures as they think about instructional design. So they engage students in informal assessments, checking for understanding. They engage in student self-assessment, so they can understand what the student understands about their own progress. And then finally, a formal or summative assessment where they have some kind of product, process, or performance from every single student that they look across that whole classroom and then think about what's going on with the whole classroom and then also individuals inside of the classroom. Based on all that data that they've collected from their multiple measures and different ways they've engaged students in learning around higher order thinking and academic language development, they then determine what is the next lesson they need to teach. They actually teach that lesson in video, record that as well, and then reflect on the outcome. So quite complex. So in our pilot, we had 275 candidates that registered to participate, 24 programs, and we ended up with 250 submissions that we scored. And again, we had to score both cycles, so really scored 500. So that was our pilot. We learned a great deal from that pilot. And particularly, I just want to note what came out of that pilot that led into the field test. So we were particularly interested in coming out of the pilot to really look back at the alignment between what we asked candidates to do, the prompts we asked them, the evidence to collect, and then the rubrics themselves to make sure there really was tight alignment there. That also brought us to a big discussion about our rubrics in general. In our pilot, they were more formative in nature, a little more broad. We realized perhaps that wouldn't give candidates really specific detailed feedback or programs, which would then, we'd sort of be missing the mark if that were the case. And so we went back and revised our rubrics and turned them into analytic rubrics that are very detailed. We ended up with 11 and 12 for that work coming into the field test. We also took a re-look at our videos. There's a lot of video here because we are trying to measure performance and not writing or other aspects of teaching, but really how teachers actually teach and engage with students. And so we re-looked at that again to make sure we really had enough video evidence, clarified prompts, and thought again a lot about terminology. So a lot of the terminology we're using, a lot of the terminology in the new TPEs is still in some cases new to the field. And so we have been asked by candidates and programs to really build a very in-depth glossary to determine and define what we're asking for. And we're even moving towards building an annotated bibliography that will help candidates move towards finding the research behind why we would think about teaching in this way. So all that's coming, but that's what came out of the field out of the pilot, moved us into the field test. So in our field test, we had 875 candidates that registered, 28 programs that worked with us, and then 851 submissions, turning into 1,702 cycles to score. So we were pretty busy this spring, and we learned a great deal from the field test. With the reason our numbers grew, we had originally been aiming for 550 candidates, but programs that engaged with us, programs that met that waiver, did not want to ask candidates in their programs to do different assessments. So we were able to work with our contractor and ask them to expand the numbers that we would actually take in and score. And so we were able to do that. And so you can see how we have been able to work with more. 28 programs is a little under half of the programs that we will be working with. So we still have quite a number of programs to work with as we move into the fall that have not yet engaged in this new redeveloped TPA. And so we will be providing a lot of support to them as well. But we were very excited to see that at least 28 programs wanted to work with us in the field test. And the programs reported in all of the survey work we did that they learned quite a bit by engaging with us. All right, so that moves us into me wanting to talk to you a little bit about our assessor training and the types of data that we collected. So as we move through the field test, as candidates completed their cycles, as program coordinators completed their engagement in supporting candidates in those cycles, and as assessors completed scoring, we asked them to fill out surveys and gathered all of that data and took a real close look at it. In addition, we had all the assessment scoring data as well. And in the field test, we moved from sort of one type of computer-assisted way of submitting work and what have you to the actual online system that we will be using moving forward. So we were also kind of field testing how that registration process worked for candidates, how candidates were able to upload videos and annotate videos and all of that online. And we were successful in helping programs and candidates do that. So we were also testing that out. But in our assessor training as well, we were able to gather more sort of firsthand information from those assessors about what they were grappling with. And as I said, we have these 2 cycles. We have a plan in place where we're training assessors to either score cycle 1 and become experts in that, or cycle 2. I'm sure as we move forward, some people will have the interest in learning how to score both, but it takes, an hour or so to score a submission. So moving into that work, we learned a great deal about the fact that these cycles are complex. When you have multiple analytic rubrics, it takes a little more time to train people so they can really understand deeply what you're assessing. And so we, one of the big takeaways from the field test is that we really needed to revamp our assessor training and give more support there so that we could calibrate the number of assessors that we're going to need to score the upcoming 8,000 submissions that we're expecting in this first administration. So you can see we're in a scaling up process, and I'm sure we will hit our mark with all of our content-specific assessors and get them ready to calibrate and score. The assessor training was a combination of online and face-to-face training, and we will continue to explore that model. As we move through the spring field tests and scoring, we did double score 10% of the submissions to make sure that we were having good inter-rater reliability, and basically found out that we needed to do some more work to increase our inter-rater reliability, which we will be doing. So what did we find out? Again, from our candidates, program coordinators, and assessors, we needed to continue to look at that alignment and tighten up what we're asking candidates to do in the prompts and directions and in the rubrics. So we've been working on that. We needed to provide a little more clarification to candidates about the focus students they need to select. So they will be looking particularly at an English learner, at a special needs student who has learning needs of some kind, or a gifted student, and a third focus student. And this is where some of the questioning from the field is still coming from. And what do you mean by that third student, and who should that student be, and how do we identify them? So we have been working on providing more clarification around that. And then again, still a request for more clarification of terminology. So we're continuing to move forward with, as we said, coming up with this annotated bibliography to help them understand things like funds of knowledge and what is student self-assessment for first graders, for example. And then finally, really looking again at our videos and making sure that as we ask candidates to go in and look at their own videos of teaching and annotate those videos, that those annotation titles are really the ones that we needed to be looking at. So even as we come out of this field test, we have spent the last 2 months really doing more revisions and more work. One of the other request was that there was a lot of cognitive load in this, not only in reading the directions, but in the assessors when they scored. So in looking at those rubrics, we were able to bring the rubrics back down from 11 and 12 to 8 and 9 and decrease a little bit of that cognitive load. And we have some plans for reformatting some of the materials for candidates so that they're not seeing all of it at once, but seeing parts of it. All right, so that brings us to some key features that I just want to highlight quickly as we move through this item. What came out of all of this work were really some sort of underlying, features is the word we decided to use, of this assessment system. So one of the things that we've been working with the field a lot on is the notion of performance assessment being a transparent performance assessment. It's open. Candidates see it before they engage with it. They are to work on understanding the rubrics for the expectations around performance before they submit. They should see examples of prior responses and of quality teaching practice, and they should also be engaging in practicing all of these things many, many times before they ever actually engage in the assessment and then submit it for scoring. Peer review. We're very interested in having candidates work together. Teaching is a collaborative effort, and we don't ever really want to set up a candidate to think that they are on their own. They're part of a team. The plan Teach, Assess, Reflect, and Apply cycle is a cycle that we've been using for a long time in California with candidates. Early on in our work in induction and around the CFAST assessments and things like that, we've always asked candidates to move through this cycle. So that ended up in our assessment. The 2 cycles and the analytic rubric so that candidates can get feedback over time was really important to the design team. That again was a feature from the earlier version, and where we had 4 tasks, we downsized to 2, but we still wanted to make sure that candidates could get feedback as they moved along so they wouldn't finish a program and then be told, oh, you know, by the way, you didn't meet the standard and you're not going to get a credential. You need to re-enroll. So we wanted to make sure we had a system that was educative and supportive of candidates. Underlying all of this work really is a universal design for learning set of principles around really engaging all students in the least restrictive environment for learning and making sure they had multiple ways to engage in content and multiple ways to show us how they know content. And we really wanted to come at this work from an asset-based approach. So what is it that students know and are able to do already? They bring a lot into the classroom, and we need to build off of that. So particularly in Cycle 1, we really move from this asset-based approach into thinking about the funds of knowledge and what have you that students have as they come into the classroom. What languages are they speaking, for example? And then, of course, deep content, deep learning. So really pushing beyond rote memorization to, really getting into analysis, synthesis, evaluation, interpretation, and transfer of knowledge. So really pushing beyond the worksheet to really engaging in active learning around process, product, and performance. Use of educational technology to enhance and push content knowledge, really bringing that in. Students use technology all the time, and we need to be making sure that they're using it in the classroom to further their content knowledge. And then multiple sources of assessment, not just looking at one measure and making a decision, an end-of-unit test or something of that nature, but really looking across multiple modes of measurement to understand deeply what a student knows and is able to do and what they need support to move forward with. And then, of course, diagnostic feedback to candidates on our end. We really wanted to be able to provide much more specific and detailed feedback, thus the analytic rubrics to candidates and programs. Centralized scoring we've talked about. And then this is a new opportunity for us to explore as well with our candidates. The programs that are supporting bilingual candidate preparation really wanted to make sure that candidates didn't have to translate everything back into English if they were in fact teaching in another language in their classroom setting. So we are able to begin by offering to multiple subject candidates only the opportunity to submit with no translation, and we will expand that as we move forward and as we understand how many bilingual programs and languages we are teaching in and where we need to do that so that there's not an extra burden based on bilingual teachers in the assessment. So those are the features, and that brings us into next steps. So there are a number of things we need to continue to work on around finalizing our cycles and rubrics and guides and glossaries and the annotated bibliography so that we have everything prepared for this field, which will all be coming out in August and September. Submission dates have been established, so every month of the calendar year, candidates will be able to submit their performances on these cycles and get feedback within 3 weeks. We will continue to recruit assessors. We need to grow our assessor pool to somewhere near 700 or so. So anyone that you know that might be interested in being assessor, we'd love for you to personally invite them to apply. The application is provided in our PSDE news. And we will continue to support building out materials and working directly with our CalTPA coordinators. So every one of the 55 programs that's working with us as we move into this administration has an assigned performance assessment coordinator, basically, as their connection to the commission, and we will be working with them online and face-to-face in trainings, which are coming up in this fall, and we worked with them, those that did join us in the field test and pilot, to try and bring them along. And then, of course, as we get submissions in this first administration, in response to these revised cycles and rubrics, we will then conduct a standard setting study. And that standard setting study, the results of that and a recommendation will then be brought forward to you sometime next spring so that you can set that passing standard. In the meantime, what we are going to do is recommend that we move forward with the current passing threshold that was set for the field test and the pilot to support candidates, which basically means a candidate across the rubrics must gain a score of 2 on every rubric, and then in each cycle they have an opportunity, I guess, to score a 1 once on each cycle and still meet the passing threshold. So basically 2 across the board on a 5-point scale, and then 1 on each cycle, maintaining that consistency from pilot to field test to this first administration to make sure that we are supporting candidates and programs as we move into this high stakes assessment. We'll continue to support our candidates as they transition. You know, many are coming out of different models. We have 3 currently approved models of the TPA, and so as shift happens, we want to support our candidates. So anyone that is enrolling in a program as of July 1st will come into this new final version of the CalTPA for now, final version. And then candidates also, if they had started a prior TPA model, have the right to continue to try and pass that model for a period of time. And then finally, we did encourage programs that had candidates enrolling late in the spring to wait and take the assessment this fall. So we're offering all those kinds of strategies to the field to support candidates as we move through this transitional year. And then all kinds of support in that final table scheduled as we move forward, from information that comes out every Friday on our PSDE news to monthly online opportunities for programs to be online with us. We're calling them virtual think tanks, and we just held one on July 27th, and we had 40 plus join us and had a lively conversation for an hour. We actually stayed on an extra half an hour because there were lots of questions. So we may expand those to, like, maybe 2-hour windows, but lots of support coming out from the commission and lots of programs reaching in for support. So we're looking for all the ways that we can do that efficiently and not having to have people travel around, so using online strategies. Workshops are coming up this fall. We will be at all of them talking about this new work and supporting people and providing information. So with that, that's the item and an overview, really, of the work that's been going on. So turn it back to you.
Thank you. That's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work.
And what's coming up is a lot of work as well. Thank you for that.
Yes.
We do have a public comment. Lynn Scott, would you please come up and state your name and affiliation?
Good morning. I'm Lynn Scott. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Teacher Education at Cal State East Bay. Today I'm here representing the CalTPA, California Association for Bilingual Teacher Education. It's an affiliate of CABE, the California Association of Bilingual Education. And I'm with 2 colleagues also with CABE today. We realize we're sitting in the location normally reserved for CTA, but I don't know if there's official or somebody maybe could inform us. But just in case anybody's looking at, we are not part of CTA today, but we're enjoying their seats. We appreciate the work that's been done on this, and it's definitely moving forward in the right direction. We've been concerned about 2 issues which were mentioned today, that extra burdens are placed on bilingual teacher education candidates, especially through translations. And I see that you made the first step in addressing this with this year in Spanish. Multiple subject credentials will not have to translate that, because what we were seeing was that student teacher candidates would opt to have an English-only placement because of this extra burden. We're also hearing that this continues for Mandarin immersion schools, for example, and Cantonese, some of the other priority languages. So we really want to encourage you to keep moving forward. Don't delay, but keep moving forward. And also, I was just curious, just briefly, were any of the field tests done with bilingual candidates? You think there were some?
We had some.
Some, okay.
It wasn't a large number, but I know we had some bilingual candidates.
One thing that when we're looking at the data is we don't often see disaggregated data on the bilingual candidates, so it's kind of mixed in. So we're not sure about that. And these are comments that we've also made about EdTPA and CalTPA in the past. We are not really able to identify if passing rates and other things are related to the fact that the candidate may not have been a native English speaker and have learned English as a second language along their path, so we can determine if there's some other burdens or support we need to provide. Not to water down the assessment, to make sure it's a valid assessment of teaching practice. Because you also commented a previous critique that we would hear from the field over and over, that it was a writing assessment, and CalTPA has moved towards making the videos more concrete. So great movement in that area. So now how do we branch this to have an influence on the national level with EdTPA? And we're still continuing to see programs that use EdTPA are not, that it is more onerous for the bilingual teacher candidate. And since we have such a shortage and the state has embraced the bilingual efforts, that we need to keep moving in this direction. So I just wanted to bring it to everyone's attention that we're watching, we're writing letters to the executive secretary to keep this in the forefront, that we don't want to add additional hurdles to bilingual teacher candidates. So thank you for your work.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. The public comment period for this item is now closed. We'll now hear from commissioners. Do we have any questions on this item? Comments? Chair Darlene Hammond.
Well, I just want to note for people what a huge transformation has happened in assessment in our state, and give kudos to the entire team that has been working on the CalTPA and our colleagues from education evaluation systems as well. And just to point out a few things, and for some of the newer commissioners, this may be helpful. In 1998, SB 2042 passed a requirement that we needed to have performance assessments for teachers. So California became the very first state to have to develop a way to look at whether people could actually teach as a mechanism for giving the license, rather than filling in, bubbles on a multiple choice test. So we've come a long way since then. There was another CalTPA, which began that process. The PACT, which some institutions in the state created, the FAST, which Fresno uses as a performance assessment. And there's been an iterative process over these last 20 years to sort of evolve and improve these assessments. And I was interested in the last comment about how EdTPA might learn from the CalTPA. CalTPA has been learning from the PACT and the EdTPA, and it's forcing everyone to get better at what they do. And just to point out what is so impressive about this work. First of all, of course, it asks teachers to plan for not only a whole class of students, but for particular target students. So it's got a developmental student-centered focus. They have to identify a student with special education needs, a student who's an English learner, students who have a variety of needs, and think specifically about them in the course of the lesson as well as about the class as a whole. They need to identify formative assessments and summative assessments as well as teaching plans. They do that teaching, they videotape themselves teaching so we get to see the practice. They collect evidence of student learning. They evaluate that evidence of student learning for those focus students as well as for the class as a whole. They reflect on what would need to be done in the future. This happens in two different stages in the new CalTPA. So what that does is it forces teachers to think very early on in their careers about how are students learning and what am I doing to meet the needs of every child in my classroom, organized around the new standards. This new one is content specific, something that got picked up from the PACT and the EdTPA. It's student focused and very developmental in its orientation. Amy, you gave a great discussion of why and how it's educative. And this is a framework for assessment
That I think is extremely important. Assessment is not just about having cut scores and figuring out who's in and who's out. Assessment is about getting the greatest teaching possible that we can get in our state. And so we want people to learn. We want people to get better as they go through stage 1 and stage 2 and get feedback. Because at the end of the day, it's that performance that matters. It's whether they can actually do the job in the classroom. The move to make a bilingual approach is so in tune with the California move to become a multilingual state in so many ways. And there's been movement at the state board as well to say multilingualism is, in fact, a great virtue for all of our young people. And not only does it make us economically more vibrant and viable and all of that, it also builds neurons in the brain and just makes you a more intelligent person to become multilingual. So to bring that in line, I think, is also a wonderful step forward. So I just want to applaud all of the movement that is embedded in this. It really is a national move forward. Sometimes they say when California sneezes, the nation catches a cold. This would be a case where if we are sneezing, it will be a good thing elsewhere across the nation, I think, as well, and really quite a major evolution in the work. I know it's been really challenging. I know there's a long way to go, but I just want to really appreciate what this will do for the quality of teaching and the quality of teacher education in the state. So thank you.
I want to echo Chair Darling Hammond's accolades. This is significant. Those that have been part of the pilot as well has been quite extensive, but the work that you've all done and the support that you have provided through the pilot, the support to the candidates, the support to the teacher preparation institutions is so significant, and so thank you for that. Do you want to echo Dr. Scott's concerns of CalTPA and with the bilingual group? That again, I think there's some headway that's already been made there, and to continue that effort because I do think that's important to support that population of students. But again, congratulations. A lot more work to be done still, but what a great momentum forward. And I do think California is setting the standards in many ways that the nation will follow.
Commissioner Marks?
Thank you for your work. It's the one thing, your work is the one thing that really excited me about this commission. I've had student teachers in my classroom for years, and this last year, what they had to do with the TPA was just the quality of questions, the level of change. It's just the quality was so much more in a very short period of time. So I just want to thank you for your work. It's really exciting to hear about it, and thanks for, bringing that to the classroom.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, any other comments? Commissioner Redmond?
Thank you for all of this and all the hard work over the years to get to this point and to be here and where it's ongoing. I'm very curious. I was looking at the cycles, and I'm very curious about the analytical rubrics underneath them. Are they in here? Is there something that I'm missing where I can see kind of what's underneath that? Or
thank you for asking me that question, because I forgot to point out we have a handout for you.
Oh, right.
So there was a lot to share, and I just sort of got lost in all the details. But this isn't going to quite give you what you're asking for, I don't think, but it will help you understand. So the first couple pages here is the detailed explanation that we have posted in our policy section on our website about how to support candidates. So we laid it all out because sometimes really people don't believe that we mean what we're saying out loud. So we have it in writing to help people reinforce the notion that you can engage and support during assessment. But behind that is a cover page that's kind of stapled in a bit of an odd way. And then what you get is the overview sort of introduction that ends up in most of our documents for candidates. And then you get the evidence tables, which clearly point out all the different things we're asking step by step, from plan to teach, assess, to reflect, to apply, for the candidate to submit. And it's in there for cycle 1, followed by the evidence table then for cycle 2, so you can really see where we're asking for written narrative, where we're asking for videos and annotation, where we're asking for reflection. And then at the very end, you get the tables of the essential questions that drive the 5-level analytic rubric. So this will at least give you a sense of the overview of the particular sort of, I would call, constructs, sometimes multiple constructs in a rubric that we're measuring. And these are tied back to the teaching performance expectations. But we do have the rubrics in their fuller description. We'd be happy to share that with you as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And having not looked very closely at these yet, I just want to just put out there that I'm very interested in cycle 1 and kind of following that. I'm very interested in the idea of creating a positive learning environment and providing social and emotional supports. And that's because I feel like that's been a gap, and there have been gaps, and this is why we're doing this, and there are different types of gaps, including English language learners. But this gap right here is one that I think has had a huge impact on equity in education and on achievement gaps and on around neighborhoods and schools, race and ethnicity, and the learning that teachers do. So I'm very curious about how that component gets developed, and the questions that are asked, and how much we are diligent about ensuring that teachers who come from wherever and are teaching in a different place are new, are able to support students that they come in contact with, in all students, and that we don't lose students early, and we don't lose teachers early because of it. And so anyway, so I'm just wanted to let you know that I'm very curious about that, and I'm interested in a real heightened focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Redmond. Do we have any other comments? Yes, Commissioner Greneau-Shire.
Well, let me add my congratulations as well, Amy, to you and your team. This has been an incredibly heavy lift, and you have approached this work with thoughtfulness and care and strategy, so good for you. Can you talk just a little bit more about the assessor pool and efforts to ensure a diverse, sufficient supply of folks moving into the future? Thank you.
Yeah, that's it. So as we move into this administration year, identifying assessors, a diverse pool of assessors, and getting them to calibrate appropriately is front and foremost on our minds. So we have new strategies around marketing. So I'll talk a little bit about this, and then I'll turn it over to Nicole as well. But really reaching out, for example, to the National Board Qualified Teachers, particularly reaching out to our K-12 partners to try and bring more credentialed teachers into the pool. The guidelines for assessor qualifications are in one of your appendices in the back there. And continuing to build from the assessors we worked with in the pilot to the assessors we worked with in the field, and then continuing moving them forward, but also really reaching out and getting many more. Around the bilingual issue, what was important was we had to make sure we would have enough bilingual assessors to be able to keep the promise to candidates. And so we've been working directly with all the current bilingual programs to ask them to tell us directly how many assessors they'll be sending to our trainings so we can help them calibrate so they can help us score, because without them we can't do this. So the assessors are a key linchpin in this whole effort. But I'll turn it over to Nicole for a second, and maybe you want to talk about some more things, or Wayne, that I forgot to mention around that. But
Sure. And the bilingual is of concern in particular because, remember, you have content-specific assessments. So we need, if we're going to do the bilingual across the board, we need to make sure that we have science experts who are also bilingual in any number of the languages. I think you currently have 23 languages that you assess. So you can see how it very quickly becomes complex. So that's why we're ramping up in that area. But yours was a concern in particular of one of our design team members, and we've been working very closely with him, making sure, in fact, that we do have good representation of educator involvement on all of the different committees that we're working with, and also with the assessors. And like Amy said, we're reaching out. We used seabeds, got over 10,000 emails right there, so we're doing a really wide spread across the state. Also reaching out to very specifically the professional organizations in all of the content areas, and then, of course, working with this design team member in particular to make sure that we are getting that diversity from each of those groups. So it's growing very quickly. We'll probably in the end have over 600 assessors.
I add to that just one little bit more. I think that really important pool of people to recruit into this are the people serving as master teachers for the student teachers. And we'll find more of them in bilingual content-specific areas. I think if we work through preparation programs, where are you placing your bilingual candidates, and those teachers ought to be a pool that we go after directly. It'd be very helpful if the institutions of higher education could help with that recruitment effort. And the other effort that I think we have launched is to reach out to the national board certified teachers in the state to see if within that network we can begin to cultivate participation in the assessment of this work, of these candidates. And that's another exciting part of building a pool of people. And one of the ways in which this system is not just to get to a score. We're not just getting to a score. This is educative on so many levels, and the opportunity to bring our master teacher community into this work directly, I think, will strengthen their understanding of their role and make them stronger, more coherent partners with the preparation programs, just by virtue of having the same target that we're pushing toward in terms of candidate readiness to do this kind of work in a performative way. So,
Commissioner Grinnell-Shire?
So I would offer on behalf of my IHE colleagues to work really closely with you in a targeted recruitment effort to our master teachers and our district partners, so we can co-construct some messages to get out to them, and then we and our deans and our faculty can follow up. So we're happy to do that.
The other thing we're trying to think about structures and systems that are already in place, and I know we have a new requirement of 10 hours of training for teachers, and we're wondering if there's a way to say, well, part of that 10-hour commitment could be gained by becoming an assessor. So we're looking for structures like that would help incentivize and encourage people to say, oh, well, maybe that would be really interesting for me, and I'll do that instead of this. So that was another idea that I've been thinking about on weekends about how we're going to get all these assessors to come and be with us. We will also be providing stipends for assessors and things like that may incentivize some or may not. But really the point, as Mary said, is it's educative, and it's the best professional development. Really, you can almost get yourself into. I mean, you have to stay really focused and dig in, but you leave really having an understanding, and over time, certainly a statewide understanding of what teaching quality looks like, which can't help but inform then the way you interact as you prepare teachers. So, we're looking for any way you can support us, and we'll reach out right away and see what we can put together. We also just got a letter put together from Mary that's going out to districts, we love you and we want to work with you and you're our partners. So here come these assessments, not only for TPA, but APA, and we really need you to be with us. So that's going out to districts within the next week and has already gone out to lots of our coordinators so they can use it as they go out and build relationships with districts. So yeah, any thoughts at all that you have on this also in addition to what we're doing would be great. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Martinez?
So that point about really good, that's really good PD for the assessors. Can you offer PD credit or something that would help incentivize and attract more assessors?
I mean, I think we're looking to do anything we can that's legal. So
we like legal. We're a big fan of legal.
That we can think of that. I don't know how, the commission can't really give like credit units or anything like that, but I'm sure we can do something more than just say thank you. If we put our
Or
minds
some kind of
together, there has to be a
certification,
way
you know, like some kind of certificate or
Right.
something that would show that they're kind of almost a more advanced
Mhm.
learner in teaching and learning.
Mhm. Yeah, we'd love to anything like that, because I think it really is hard work, and it really needs to be appreciated when people step into it. So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the rich discussion. I'd also like to add, and I want to echo Executive Director Sandy's comment about reaching out to the National Board Teacher Networks. There's a very diverse pool in San Francisco area, Los Angeles, and I think we have common contacts. Tammy Harris, who is now working here in California, and also it was very exciting for me to hear what it is that what this is going to look like, because my teacher preparation program was a lot like this. And so I was listening to this and I was thinking, wow, this is what prepared me to be ready to go into the classroom. And then, you know, the school where I started teaching was also like this. But then when I moved, I was in that silo that we hear about where I'm just in a classroom. And so going through the National Board process opened that up so that I'd be sitting there with other teachers and we'd be reading our portfolios and talking, as I imagine what you were saying, envision new teachers talking to their cohort and giving each other feedback and learning, not just like I've got to pass this test. And so this process, as it grows, will take us from those silos into just a community of learners, which is what is the hope for all of our teachers here in California and the country. So thank you so much for this. This is an information item, and no action is needed. Thank you so much, Ms. Rising, for all of the information. And why don't we take a 15-minute break? All right.
Ready? Thank you.
All right, thank you for taking your seats. We're going to go ahead and get started. And we're moving into item 2E. Item 2E is proposed titles, program standards. Program standards and teaching performance expectations for education specialist teachers. This item is being presented by Terry Clark and Sarah Solari Colombini. This is an information action item. Ms. Clark, will you please begin?
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. This item continues the work and the discussion related to the preparation of individuals for special education teaching credentials. In California, these credentials are called the Education Specialist Credentials, and they currently come in 7 specialty content areas. The most prevalent credential is the mild to moderate disabilities, moderate to severe disabilities, early childhood special education, deaf and hard of hearing, visual impairments, physical and other health impairments, and language and academic development. Again, because we have some new commissioners, a little bit of history. About 8 years ago, a statewide educator excellence advisory group was convened. The superintendent of public instruction was new, and this group of individuals came together under the superintendent's guidance and the chair of our commission, Linda Darling-Hammond, to really think about how education needs to be changed so that it can be really ready for the 2020 and beyond years. A report, Greatness by Design, Supporting Outstanding Teaching to Sustain a Golden State, was released in September of 2012. Based partly on that fact that work was really well received, a lot of agencies are working to implement the recommendations from that report. A group was convened in late 2013 to focus on special education. Again, special education in all areas, the preparation and licensing of teachers, professional learning for special education teachers, evidence-based practices, assessment, finance, early learning, and family and student engagement. That group's report, One System, Reforming Education to Serve All Students, was released in spring of 2015. So the work of the Commission's Preliminary Education Specialist Work Group was really based on those earlier reports, and it was also informed by the work of the Accreditation Study Work Group that the Commission sponsored between 2014 and 2016. The work group looked at and revised the preliminary multiple and single subject program standards and the teaching performance expectations. That's kind of the end of the history lesson. So this item here then builds and the item that was brought forth in June of 2018. At that meeting, you took action on 3 concepts related to the education specialist credential. These concepts are summarized on page 1. They were that you affirmed that the current subject matter requirements for prospective special education teachers should remain the same. A candidate can complete a commission-approved subject matter program or pass an assessment, they're called CSETs, for the appropriate content area. And this could be in multiple subject content area or for single subject teachers, English, mathematics, any of the sciences, social studies, world languages, art, and music. You also adopted TPEs for 3 of the specialty content areas, for the deaf and hard of hearing credential, the visual impairments credential, and the early childhood special education teaching credential. And you affirmed, again, you talked about this earlier, but you affirmed again that the Commission is going to, through the regulatory process, it's going to modify the authorization for the early childhood special education credential to go, instead of birth through 5, but birth through kindergarten. So that would allow an early childhood special education teacher to teach both TK and kindergarten. So those are 3 things you acted on at the June meeting. The June item had many more topics and additional recommendations where no action was taken at that time. 3 of those topics are included in this agenda item, and we're going to be presenting some updated recommendations based on the conversations you had, the comments from the field, and so we have slightly updated recommendations. The Commission acts to adopt requirements for credentials, usually through program standards and performance expectations, but it also implements through Title V regulations the authorization statement that goes with that credential. Authorization statements are important because they inform employers for assignments of educators, and they also have to do with the monitoring of those educators in their assignments. The appropriate authorization for the education specialist teaching credential, the 2 major ones, mild, moderate, and moderate severe at this point in time, we need to really have some more conversation. Some more conversation needs to take place with stakeholders to really finalize the recommended authorization statements. So the topic of authorization for those 2 primary education specialist teaching credentials is not included in this item. There are 3 recommendations that are addressed in this item. I'm going to present on the first recommendation, and then Dr. Solari Colombini will present on the second and third topics. We plan to pause between each of the topics to ask if the commissioners have any clarifying questions, and if you want to take any notes, and then we'll continue to the next topic, the third topic, and then ready for public comment. So the topic I get to present on is the names of the credentials. On the bottom of page 2, you'll see a table. There are currently 2 special education credentials that are most often earned, the mild to moderate disabilities credential and the moderate to severe disabilities. You'll see in the table we also identified that mild to moderate disabilities used to be called the learning handicapped credential. The learning handicap credential had a certain set of authorizations that went with it and a certain amount of preparation. The mild to moderate disabilities credential has a different authorization. One of the key differences is that all education specialist mild to moderate and moderate severe credentials authorize the individual to teach in a resource setting. The learning handicap credential did not. So sometimes when there's a change in credential name, there's a change in actually what it's authorized to do. So that name can be very important. The moderate severe disabilities credential used to be called the severely handicapped credential. And then you'll see 2 more additional columns. The center column are credential names that were there in the June item. They were possible names we had come up with, talked with the field about. But because, more is always better, this is California, the right-hand column has some additional possible titles for these credentials. For ease of discussion, we identified all the mild to moderate options with numbers, and we've identified with letters all the moderate to severe possibilities. And I wanted to point out why it's important that we have actually a new title. The authorizations will be slightly different. The current authorizations for mild to moderate and moderate to severe are very focused on the federal disability categories, and there are disability categories that appear in only one of those two authorizations. The new world is really trying to look at the level of student need. Does the student need moderate support? Do they need extensive support? And actually, except for 3 of the federal disability categories of the 12 or 13, I lose track whether it's 12 or 13, and our special education expert is out of the country, so I'm filling in slightly. But all but 3 of the disability categories actually now will appear in both of the authorization statements. So the authorization is going to be different. So we really need a name that is distinct and that local education agencies will understand and not confuse with the current mild to moderate and moderate to severe. In the table on the bottom of page 2, you'll see that we've bolded 2 of the options that staff is recommending. We are recommending that the new names be moderate support needs and extensive support needs. The reality is whatever you act on is what we will put into regulations. So that is the first part of this item. So I wanted to ask if you had any clarifying questions specifically about the titles before I turn it over to Sarah. I either confused you all, put you all to sleep, or I was clear. Thank you.
Vice Chair Hine.
So I see all the new choices. Are we able to discuss further additional choices? This is not just...
Definitely. You can definitely discuss additional choices. If they're significantly different than what's on here and we can't on the spur of the moment affirm that it's going to work, we might end up having to say we need to take it back and consult with general counsel or something. But definitely the topic of titles is what's agendized. There's a recommendation from staff, but you can choose, discuss, amend.
Commissioner Darling Hammond?
I just wanted to clarify the point that you made, which is that people are thinking about the extensiveness of the needs. So you might have, for example, somebody on the autism spectrum or Asperger's spectrum, and with the same title, they might be somebody with mild support needs and somebody else with very extensive support needs. And as we know, quite often you have multiple things going on with a student at once, so they don't fit only in a disability classification. So is that the thinking that you were...
That is definitely the thinking. Now, autism actually does appear in both the mild to moderate and the moderate to severe currently, but there are some other authorizations, and I can't come up with one right off the top of my head. So currently, multiple disabilities is one of the categories, and right now, multiple disabilities is only in moderate severe, because it is likely that if you have multiple disabilities, it is on the more severe end, but we do not want to preclude the fact that there could be a student that has multiple disabilities as their diagnosis, but they really are very mild.
Yeah,
and that this student would be more appropriately served. Whereas right now, mild to moderate teachers are not allowed to serve students with multiple disabilities.
So, for example, dyslexia is widespread. 10 to 20% of the population, depending on which statistics you look at. It is correlated strongly with ADHD. About 50% of the students who are identified with dyslexia are also identified with ADHD or ADD. So that's an example that is typically or often mild, but is multiple. So I would strongly encourage us to think about, go in the direction you were going with thinking about how that cuts across. But the idea of mild support needs and more extensive support needs makes a lot of sense. In terms of how you think about what you're trying to organize the services to do for children.
Any other commissioner comments on titles? Okay, see no comments.
I have a question. So if I do have
Commissioner Martinez?
If I do have a mild disability, like ADD or something like, where am I supported in moderate support needs or
moderate support needs? Yes. And it was confusing to have moderate in both places in the prior world. And so it's moderate support needs could be fairly mild support needs. So it's mild to moderate is in the moderate support needs, and the extensive support needs is really the severe.
So for extensive, is it extensive or is it intensive?
Intensive could be another word. It's not one we put on here, but intensive. I'm looking over towards our colleagues at the Department of Ed, and intensive is not looking like it's giving the director of special education any pain. Microphone.
Hi, Kristen Wright. I would just say that intensive, there may be points of a child that has mild to moderate needs that require some intensive support at some time, but it's not in general how we would classify their level of support. So I'm okay with whatever word. I think the devil's going to be in the details about who and how they're served. So my biggest concern, if I may, is that that currently one of the reasons that we wanted to move away from the mild, mod, and mod severe is because those are labels kids are wearing, and those are classrooms that students are in. And as we're trying to work towards a more inclusive ideology and serving kids truly in their least restrictive and most inclusive environment, we don't want to have these classrooms that are labeled mild, mod, severe, and teachers that we're trying to fill the needs that way, that we're really looking at that level of student need, and it doesn't become a place. So I would just ask for you to consider whatever title you decide that we're not thinking about how the label of the child with that. We're looking at the level of need, which is kind of how this conversation ended up being to where these different titles are today, is that we wanted that level of support because we don't want any child wearing a label, especially because those definitions are not definitions for children. And so moderate, if you're mild moderate, how moderate are you? And there's no rubric for that. And so there just need to be some more clarity out there about, so who's able to, do people know, and the teachers know the level of support they might need. And another way to think about it is I think about more the intensive need or the significant need, support need, as being more the students who would take the alternate assessment. It doesn't mean that's the definition of it, but when we're talking about students with those types of needs, it would be more on the significant side. And for students that have more really mild needs, we have to ask if those truly belong in special education, or if we want to make sure that everyone is getting what they need, but that those definitions are not going to be placed on students' backs.
Thank you. Chair Darling Hammond?
Well, thinking about, this is great that you're having this conversation because it helps us understand the range of considerations. With that notion that kids are wearing these labels, I worry about using moderate support needs because it could just be carried in the same way. And it could also confuse the field because they're used to mild, moderate, and now they say, well, is there no more, mild? And we do want, in an MTSS world with, an inclusive approach, we want kids who have mild needs, nonetheless, to get the help that they need at the moment they need it, which may not be constant, and it may be, periodic, or it may be the specialist advising the teacher about how to make the accommodations or the modifications for that child. I wonder if we should also be thinking to shift that title as well for the reasons that you just gave to something like inclusive support needs or one of these others that you've got here, since we're shifting the other title from moderate severe. So I just would, I think extensive or significant support needs makes sense on the one side. And then on the other one, I don't know what the right term might be, but inclusive support needs strikes me as one way to characterize it.
Commissioner Brown, and then Greenoshire and Commissioner Redmond.
Thanks for your work. It's interesting how we're trying to get this right, and what I think is we'll get it right we'll keep getting it right, but in another 5 or 10 years, we'll have to have this conversation again and again. I had a couple of interesting conversations with some teachers that work with children with special needs, and I wrote a couple of the notes here that I wanted to just read. One of them says, while I understand the concerns of those who have provided input that there may not be much difference between primary disabilities served through moderate support needs and extensive support needs, I think that this model is okay because I think it distinguishes a level of need of child, which might change over time. And then another one said, I think that the two descriptors, moderate support and extensive support, allow for teachers to be prepared to meet the needs of all students and mitigate for the needs of students instead of being limited by the designation as provided on the IEP. So I think that those 2 points are important to, I know what's in a title, but I think it needs to distinguish for the teachers that are in working with children with special needs, all of us that are in general education, and also the families. So whatever 2 words we say, 2 categories that we say, let's make it sound different enough. But the piece, and then finally, the piece about this mild moderate around multiple disabilities was also mentioned by a third person, that it's important to be able to understand that right now the way it sits is if someone has any multiple disabilities, you have to have someone who is at that moderate to severe, even if the sum title for that child wouldn't put them in that place. And then a person who has a mild moderate ends up needing to get a moderate severe person to supervise their work, which doesn't make any sense either. So those are my 3 points.
Thank you. Commissioner.
So thank you for your work and your persistence with this really important agenda item. So I had a couple of thoughts. I think we are right where we need to be in terms of focusing on level of need and level of support that individual needs. I appreciate and support the proposed titles from the staff in terms of moderate and extensive, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. I think the concern about confusion to the field, we have to be responsible to communicating this change to the field, and I trust that my colleagues will understand that we are now moving from previous titles to these, whatever titles we come up with. So I'm less concerned that people won't understand the difference between mild, moderate, moderate, severe. I think that's our responsibility to inform them. When I think about multi-tiered systems of support, I think about children with different levels of needs across the levels of support. And so the students with extensive support needs are probably going to be those students who are at the top of that pyramid, who require very intense intervention. And the students with mild support needs are probably going to get served in a general education classroom with maybe some additional consultation from a variety of educational experts. So I'm not as concerned about that. I worry that if we use the term inclusive support needs, that might confuse the field in terms of what we collectively understand to be inclusive education, and that regardless of the disability label or level, or regardless of the level of support, all those students should be in an inclusive setting with good support. So I've thought a lot about that title, and I think inclusive education describes good schooling, which includes different levels of support. So I'm not keen on that. And so again, since we're taking these topics one by one, I want to support the moderate and extensive support need labels. Thank you.
Commissioner Redevelopment, and then Commissioner Zeppo.
Thank you. My only question is, do these titles, are they really for the field who will develop an understanding of what they mean over time, like mild mod, something like that a parent or a lay person wouldn't automatically know, or does it need to describe to the parent, the student, automatically have an understanding based on the title of what that means? I mean, does it need to be that readily accessible so someone who's a lay person automatically understands sort of the difference, or has an understanding of kind of what that title would represent? Is it for the field, or is it really for insiders, or is it also for parents, students, any other one?
I think it's both. It starts off as an insider title because it is used by districts and counties to assign teachers, and it's also used by districts, counties, and the commission to monitor teachers. But I think through use of time, it does become known by parents. And so having it be informative to them and not confusing is, I think, our goal.
It's meant to be flexible enough so that a student's needs are automatically met, or just in time. So when a student needs extensive support, they're able to get that, so their needs are met immediately.
Commissioner Zeppo and then Commissioner Darling Hammond.
First, want to reiterate and actually affirm everything that was said by Commissioner Gronoshire of the confusion that may come with the wording of inclusive and moderate would definitely be something that we support. But also just a process question. My understanding is this is clarifying questions at this point, not necessarily stating our opinions. Is that correct?
Right, yeah. And since I'm next in the queue, I was going to say we should probably terminate this conversation because we're getting into the real discussion. Hear the rest of the presentation, take public comment, and hold all of our thoughts about the deep discussion until we get back to that.
Please continue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we still have two other topics to discuss. The first will be program standards, and the second will be teaching performance expectations, both for the education specialist teacher. Okay, so I'll start with the program standards. If you recall, at the June Commission meeting, stakeholders requested that there be a stronger alignment between the program standards for education specialist credentials and the teaching performance expectations for those same teachers. At the end of the comment period, Terry Clark, our director of the Professional Services Division, suggested that Program Standard 1, which refers to programs design and curriculum, not be broken into subsections for each of the 5 initial special education credentials. Instead, it was suggested that the teaching performance expectations for each of the unique credential areas provide the specificity required for a program's curriculum, as well as for subsequent program standards, including clinical practice. So a PowerPoint presentation has been prepared to illustrate the parallel construction of the education specialist program standards to the multiple subject and single subject program standards, and to highlight the content of the program standards. This presentation will also illustrate how the TPEs for the moderate support needs and the extensive support needs credential candidates have been expanded to address the areas of concerns that were raised by stakeholders in the field, and to illustrate how the competencies that were previously embedded in the physical and health impairments credential and the language and academic development credential were folded into the draft TPEs. Remember, we collapsed from 7 initial credentials into 5. So those competencies need to be included in the teaching performance expectations for teachers now, since those teachers will have to be able to teach students who have those disabilities. Okay, so currently, until we adopt new program standards and new teaching performance expectations, we have the current special education standards for the current 7 initial credentials. And these 7 initial credentials share 16 program design standards. The standards right now, they mix candidate competence language along with program outcome language. So in addition to the 16 program design standards, each of the 7 initial credential programs has additional standards to meet specific to its area. So the mild mod, moderate disabilities credential has an additional 6 program standards, as you see on the slide. And the moderate severe disabilities credential has an additional 8 program standards, which a program had to address to prepare candidates to receive either one of those credentials. So the work to revise the education specialist program standards and the teaching performance expectations was to strengthen and streamline the standards and the TPEs to better align them to the general education standards and TPEs to build upon that common trunk established. Okay, so
Similar to the general education program standards, the education specialist program standards have 6 standards with similar domains. While the program standards govern what programs do, what the programs are responsible for, teaching performance expectations describe what candidates should know and be able to do upon completing the teacher preparation program. Extensive work was also done to revise the general education teaching performance expectations so that general education teachers are much better prepared to provide services to all students in the least restrictive environment. So it wasn't just an overhaul of special education teaching performance expectations. General education teachers, their teaching performance expectations were also reviewed and revised so that they are better prepared to teach all students in the least restrictive environment. Okay. So Program Standard 1, Program Design and Curriculum. It ensures that candidates can deliver services in a variety of instructional settings. Given that education specialists need to ensure that students are being served in the least restrictive environment, this could mean that students are being served in a gen ed classroom or a hospital setting, right? So they need to be prepared to interface with other service providers and as well as gen ed teachers and in case management practices. So this program design standard includes the curriculum that prepares them to know the wide range of students that they're encountering and in the wide range of settings. Through Program Standard 2, this is about preparing your candidates to master all the TPEs that are required to earn your credential. And this is through coursework, fieldwork, and clinical experiences. Candidates are prepared to master those TPEs. For Program Standard 3, a rigorous and robust clinical practice that includes 600 hours over the arc of the program, of which 200 hours are supervised early field work in both general and special education settings prior to final student teaching, is meant to ensure that candidates have experiences across grade levels and with exposure to a variety of students with different disabilities, also within the continuum of special education services. Interns should also have early field experience in both general and special education settings, so there's equal preparation.
While Sarah's changing the slide, I want to point out again that on the PowerPoint is just the highlights of the standard and what's been changed specifically. Appendix A does have the full text of the standards if you want to look at that.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Program Standard 4. This standard really is about monitoring each candidate's progress towards meeting all of the teaching performance expectations as well as any other program requirements in the credential area that the candidate is seeking. And again, there's much more extensive language, as Terry referred to, in Appendix A that has the detailed language of the program standards. Thank you. For Program Standard 5, about assessing your candidates, that they're competent to hold that California credential, this program, this requires the program to monitor each candidate's progress towards meeting all of the teaching performance expectations as well as the other program requirements. Until such time a TPA is developed for the Ed Specialist TPEs, the program is going to determine whether candidates have demonstrated satisfactory performance on the full range of TPEs by passing a TPA until we adopt one. At the end of a candidate's program, the candidate will collaborate with supervisors and others from the program to develop an individual development plan for professional growth to use during their induction program to earn their clear credential. As you can gather from the 6 program standards that were just presented, the program standards govern the systems in place at the program level that ensure candidates receive adequate preparation. So in this item, we are asking you to adopt these program standards for education specialist teacher preparation programs. But before we move on from program standards to teaching performance expectations for education specialist teachers, are there any questions from commissioners about the program standards that I just presented, including about the program standards that are presented in Appendix A.
Commissioner Zeppa?
Great. Thank you. Can you go into a little more detail about the clinical requirements for interns? I know it's fairly vague. Is there any more specificity that you can provide in the thinking, particularly since it affects a lot of our programs?
The language in the standards is there, and then what we would do is work with intern programs to analyze that language and to figure out what does that mean. If you need to have 200 hours of early experiences, what can that look like? What could be the appropriate models? So the standards would govern both intern and traditional preparation programs, and we really haven't worked with intern programs yet how this would operationalize. It'll be in a similar manner to how general education has operationalized, but we do know that in special ed there's a lot of interns, so we would definitely be having that conversation. We actually think that with these new standards and the new TPEs, we need to have some statewide maybe convenings and conversations with programs to really help them have the infrastructure. They really need to talk with some of their gen ed partners also. So there's a lot that needs to happen here in technical assistance over the next couple of years.
Any other clarifying questions before we move on to the next item? Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay, so moving from the program standards to the teaching performance expectations, included in Appendix B and C of this item are the teaching performance expectations for the moderate support needs credential and the extensive support needs credential. And I'm using those titles right now because that's what we've included in the item. I understand that there might be some different ones that you select. Again, teaching performance expectations describe the set of knowledge, skills, and abilities that candidates should have in order to teach. So these TPEs are referred to in Program Standard 2, as we just went over, since programs must provide candidates the opportunity to practice and master the performance expectations. The moderate support needs and extensive support needs credential TPEs are specialized and qualitatively different. Since both the moderate support needs and the extensive support needs credential have been expanded to serve additional disability categories, some language related to the skills necessary to teach students with specific disabilities needed to be included in each set of TPEs to meet the specific legal requirements associated with appropriate preparation of teachers serving students with specific disabilities. So it is the expectation that all of the content related to disability categories that were part of the curriculum prior to these new TPEs will be maintained. In addition to the revisions made to the TPEs based upon the collapsing of 7 initial credentials into 5 initial credentials, stakeholder feedback also led to the revisions to the TPEs. So when viewing the online version of the agenda, the revisions to the TPEs that address competencies for orthopedic impairments and physical and health impairments are shown in purple font. The TPEs that address traumatic brain injuries are in green font, and the competencies that address language development are in blue font. As I go through each TPE, I will not be reviewing the language of every element of every TPE. Instead, you're going to find it in Appendix B and C, okay? Instead, I'll just be highlighting key phrases within the elements of the TPEs that were addressed, that addressed the revisions that were made or concerns that were raised by stakeholders. So when you look at these slides, you'll see just phrases, and it may seem out of context, but if you actually go back to the language in the appendix and read the complete element, it'll make more sense. So take that information. And so let's move forward. TPE 1, starting with that, engaging and supporting all students in learning. This TPE addresses students with We included complex communication needs and emphasizes the candidate's need to demonstrate knowledge of language development across disabilities. It also affirms another concern brought forward by the public about providing the least restrictive environment to students with disabilities. Again, just highlighting some of the concerns that were brought forward and showing you where within that element, the elements of that TPE, we have addressed that, or where it already existed. In TPE2, creating and maintaining effective environments for student learning, there is physical health and impairment specific language in 2.2. There's orthopedic impairment specific language in 2.3, and communication skills related to replacing negative behavior, it's autism related, included in 2.5. Also included in 2.1 is the language of inclusion. Continuing with TPE2, we have a direct reference to least restrictive environment with the implementation of supports for student success in 2.8, and 2.11 includes the needs of students who have traumatic brain injury. With TPE3, understanding and organizing subject matter for student learning, it was revised to include knowledge, skills, and abilities related to orthopedic impairments, autism, and cerebral palsy. It refers to including students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment. TPE4, planning instruction and designing learning experiences for all students, requires candidates to demonstrate knowledge, skills, and abilities using assistive technology to facilitate communication, to provide equitable access to content, and to promote learning in inclusive environments. Assessing student learning, TPE5. Again, we see that woven throughout these TPEs are competencies related to candidates' knowledge, skills, and abilities, to working with students with orthopedic impairments, traumatic brain injuries, and complex communication needs, all in the least restrictive environment. TPE 6, developing as a professional educator. This really is about the candidate's legal responsibilities with respect to all, with students with disabilities and their families, and students within any federal disability category, which is why you kind of see some select language pulled out here. This is much more, the language is lengthier within the appendix. So please, you'll really want to refer to that language because it does seem just like, oh, this is highly selective. So again, keep in mind that when we collapsed, especially PHI, which had orthopedic impairment language in it, and we have education code that requires that teachers who are teaching students with orthopedic impairments be prepared to teach orthopedic impairments, be specially prepared. We had to be mindful of that and include specific language within the TPEs that address that. So we called it out specifically. Okay, so other concerns, I'm going to just leave it on that and I'll hold for the next slide till the end of the presentation. Other concerns related, generated from the feedback that were related just in general, were student needs and disability categories. We did receive feedback that we're still focused on disability categories. However, these new proposed credentials, the extensive support needs credential can only serve, is the only one that's unique to serve deaf blind, right? Also, neither the moderate support needs nor the extensive can serve VI or DHH or early childhood special education. But we knew that those were specialty credentials that we kind of took off the table, right? So that was already a given. So the only disability category that's unique to the extensive support needs is deaf blind. Otherwise, the rest of the disability categories are subsumed under both the moderate support needs and the extensive support needs. It is still necessary to state which federal disability category each of the 5 preliminary credential areas serve, because the California Department of Education still monitors where, what they need it for monitoring purposes. So we like to work together, and so we want to continue to support that need. Also, there was a concern that the TPEs would not provide candidates with sufficient preparation in language and literacy development, which would include meeting the needs of students with dyslexia. So educator preparation programs are responsible for ensuring that beginning, moderate, and extensive support needs teachers are able to design and deliver instruction in reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language that assures all students developing English proficiency towards meeting California standards. So that's been a requirement all along. And that's included for general education teachers and special education teachers. Another concern was that the least restrictive environment was not part of the standards or the TPEs. However, we did just complete the slideshow that kind of highlighted several TPEs where it was that addressed inclusion and least restrictive environment. And there is Education Code section 56040.1 that requires every public agency to ensure the least restrictive environment for individuals with exceptional needs. So in addition to the general education TPEs that were adopted in 2016 that increased the expectations for multiple and single subject teachers to work with students with disabilities in the general ed classroom, which is the least restrictive environment for students with disabilities, we've really upped the ante here in education. A final concern brought forward in the feedback was with respect to insufficient attention to autism in the standards in the TPEs. But throughout the TPEs, references are made to students or students with disabilities. And this is an inclusionary term. So candidates really must be prepared to work with a range of students with disabilities. And so autism knowledge has been embedded in all the preliminary education specialist programs. It was in both the mild mod and the mod severe. That continues to stay. And so it's also referenced in Program Standard 1 and in the TPEs. So in this section, we kind of highlighted where in the elements in the TPEs where it was those competencies were incorporated. So are there any clarifying questions about the teaching performance expectations for ed specialist teachers from the commissioners at this time?
Okay, seeing Commissioner.
I never know how far in the weeds we should get. I don't understand neurobehavioral issues. I don't know what those are, and I'm not a specialist, but is that clear to the field? Or I just, sorry, I didn't know how. Is that just a blade of grass?
So it's not in my area of expertise, and neither is it in our Department of Ed folks' area of expertise. But we did pull experts from the field to pull this language together, and so I can certainly gather information and bring that back to you. But the language that was used is from either extensive or what currently is moderate severe support needs experts or. So unless
it's just not a term we currently use, and I was looking back to some of my folks from the field. It's just not a term we use regularly. So if we need to define it further, we can.
Okay, seeing no other clarifying questions.
Should I conclude the item?
Ms. Clark will conclude the item.
So there are 3 recommended actions, and we've put them on the slide because we knew it was a long item. If you were to take action at this meeting, staff is suggesting that because it's August of 2018 and we traditionally give institutions 2 years to look at, review, and move their course process through all the approval processes, we are suggesting that September of 2020, people starting programs at that point in time would need to start a program that addresses the new standards and the new TPEs. We would provide this in a program sponsor alert out to the field. If an institution were ready to go more quickly than that, they could let the Committee on Accreditation know. Our plan would be in that 2019 we would ask for a transition plan so that we know that all currently approved mild, moderate, and moderate severe programs understand the new TPEs and standards, understand what they need to do to move forward, and that we know that it's not just like one faculty member thinking about this. In our transition plans, we ask, who all is involved in this? What is your plan to move forward? So we would ask for a transition plan in the middle of 2019 so that we know everyone is starting this process and will be ready to move forward by 2020. So with that, and leaving the slide up there with the 3 actions we're looking for, that concludes our presentation.
Okay, we will now open up for public comment, and I have 2 public comment cards. Megan Gross, if you would please come up. And Ms. Gross? Ms. Gross, if you could state your name and affiliation, and before you state your affiliation, congratulations on being 2017's Teacher of the Year.
Thank you. So my name is Megan Gross. I am a special education teacher. I hold both the current education specialist, mild to moderate, and moderate to severe credentials. I've taught for 10 years. I'm also the California Teacher of the Year from last year. And so as a teacher in 10 years in the field, I have taught all levels of students and all student need at K through 12, with half of my experience being at the secondary level. And so I really applaud the persistence of the committee and CDE to really move forward this work of what our student needs and how do we support students in the least restrictive environment. It gives me like great joy to hear the commission talk about inclusion, and that's the expectation. And I really hope that if that's the vision, that our districts can then follow that vision. The questions that I had today and the points of just concern, I support the TPEs as they are proposed today. I think they really enhance for our candidates the really complicated job we're asking them to do. And so for our teachers who are teaching, whether you're teaching a student with a learning disability or a student with a significant disability, it's a continuum. And there are times where our students are just fine and they kind of need mild support needs. And there are times where our students go through trauma and experience significant needs. So I really appreciate the overlap. I think it gives all of our teachers an excellent foundation to do this really difficult work in supporting our students who need us to love them and challenge them and be there for them and to advocate for them. The hope that I have is that with the authorization conversation that happens later, that there really is a delineation for districts and for human resources to really understand which teachers would be supporting which students. And that's really more of a teacher personnel need than a kid need, but it is a need I see in the field. For the titles, I should have done that one first, but for the titles, it's really important to me that we don't use that language for inclusive, moderate, supports. I traditionally have supported students with the most significant needs in inclusive settings, and I would never want an administrator to have a reason to not include my kids, and that would give them a reason. So I think it's really important that language is not used to differentiate their credentials. I would also caution to not use a term like academic support needs, because my students with severe disabilities are also learning academics. So I do think those labels are important. I think that for us in the field especially, but also for our students to not be stigmatized by those labels. And then my final, I have notes, I'm sorry. It's just to think about how current teachers are going to be impacted. I know in previous situations we've had to add added authorizations, and so just to think about that process and how that will impact the current field as we're looking to recruit and retain our current teachers. So making sure that process is informative and meaningful and not arduous or expensive. So thank you very much. Thank you for this work. Thank you for your persistence. I really appreciate it.
Yes, Chair Darlene Hammond and then Vice Chair Hind.
First of all, thank you for making the effort to be here, and thank you for your work and your service and your very helpful comments. As we think about this question of the titles, if we were to move from what is currently mild, moderate, what's the noun that goes with the adjectives on our current one? Well, that's the one that we're going towards. Disabilities, right. If we were to move from mild, moderate disabilities to just moderate support needs, would there be a thought, do you think, in the field that kids with mild needs have to be served only by the regular classroom teacher and are not entitled to any support from the specialist? I'm wondering, should we keep the mild, moderate designation with support needs?
I do think you'd have some concern. I think you could delineate that in the language of the definitions. But for
a lot of people don't read the fine print.
Right, but if you're not reading the fine print, there might be an assumption. There might be pushback, I could foresee. And I certainly, on both sides, like you wouldn't want general education teachers to feel like all of a sudden they're doing this all on their own without support. So
yeah,
I think that's a legitimate concern.
Thank you.
I was just wondering if you could go back to what you were saying, because I started to follow it and then you had so much information I lost the thought. But when you were talking about the fears of students not getting the services that they need, how that would happen using something about the inclusive language, if you could just say that part again.
Certainly. So in 10 years of the work in this field, it's really still a persistent struggle to include our students with the most significant needs in general education classrooms. And so I think it's really important that the language that we use for these titles doesn't offer any excuses and doesn't offer a loophole that you're not on the academic track, you're not in the inclusive programming, because we already see that with the mod severe labels, or you're an SDC kid, you're a special day class kid. And that's currently my title. And so I never refer to myself as my paper title, because who would want their teacher to say, I'm the autism teacher, I'm the special day class teacher. So I think making sure that nothing about placement is in a label, that nothing about academics is in a label, that it's really just about the level of support that they would need.
So can I have a follow-up question? Yes, absolutely. So of the list of options that kind of been thrown on, do you have a recommendation of what you think would be, from someone who's been doing this, what would be the most beneficial?
I think the recommendation for moderate to support needs, if you wanted to add mild before that, I don't know how that would get with the differentiating of the previous credential. But of the list that's presented, that's the one that's most appealing to me, just because I see little hints of just stigmatization or things that could be easily misconstrued at the site or district level with the other titles.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Victoria Graff, if you would please come up, state your name and affiliation.
Well, good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad I'm following Megan, I have to say, because she's really said it all, I think, in terms of what we're hoping for as we prepare candidates. I'm president of the California Association of Professors of Special Education, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be sitting here at this stage, because I started with Chair Linda Darling-Hammond on the Educator Excellence Task Force 5 years ago with this work. And I've been on every work group, every task force related to this. And so I have a huge smile on my face that we're here, and I'm representing my colleagues in the preparation program. And so I'm also, very happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I also want to commend the staff here at the Commission on your patience and perseverance and being willing to really listen to the field And not only those of us at the universities and prep programs, but also, parents, district levels, administrators, and so forth. So I am speaking on behalf of educator prep programs. And as you can imagine, we've had many, many, many conversations because it is our passion, it is our commitment. And we're also very concerned about equity, and we're also concerned about outcomes for our students. And I think that's the primary focus, and I hope that we can keep outcomes for our students. It really is the primary, priority. We do support the titles. We understand some of the confusion that might ensue with this term moderate. If we could use mild moderate, I don't know, we'll have to see if that's even a possibility. I think that might allay some of the confusion. But we are supportive of the moderate at this stage. Also, extensive support needs. We've had a lot of conversation with our folks related in the former mod severe, and they all support, for the most part, the extensive support needs. So we are supporting those titles. We also support the TPEs. Again, a lot of conversation has gone on about what should be the areas that our candidates need to know and be able to do to be able to serve our students effectively in the field. Now, we understand, and there's been conversation even at the dean level with some of our universities about the length of program, and we know that that's going to be an issue. But at the end of the day, we really want the best candidates prepared in the best possible way. And so I think we have to think outside the box and think about what's feasible in terms of the length of the program, how we, can actually provide this, and also work with our gen ed colleagues, because we are actually working with the Common Trunk and General Ed TPEs. So I think this is sort of, in a way, the beginning of the next set of work that we have to do, working with CDE, working with our other professional organizations, CARS Plus, TASH, so forth, all of our organizations to really come together. I have to say, over these 5 years, it's been the most collaborative, professional work I have ever done in my 30 years in this field, because we used to be adversaries. Now we're partners. And so I sit with my colleagues here, and I'm excited about the future, and my colleagues are excited about the future. So the state of California is really moving forward. As Chair Linda Darling-Hammond said, when California sneezes, the rest of the country gets a cold. But we are already being asked to help collaborate with other states as they're going through this same process, and I think California is leading the way. So I do encourage the work that we're doing. For some of you, I don't know if you attended the conference here last week in Sacramento. There were over 2,000 general educators, special educators, administrators, CTC staff who were at that conference talking about MTSS. This is an initiative that's up and down the state. Everyone is excited about MTSS. How can we make it work? Because it will benefit all of our kids, and our candidates are really excited to be a part of it. So I urge the adoption of the 3 recommendations, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chair Darling-Hammond?
Thank you for that volunteer. I'm going to ask you a question and also ask Terry, so I'll just flag that for you. So you said that it might alleviate confusion if we used mild, moderate support needs, if that's possible. And so I wanted you to elaborate on that, and then I want to turn to Terry and say, is there any reason that it's not possible?
Well, I do think there's a question, as has been raised about students who have milder support needs and who is actually going to be, responsible for working with those students. I mean, I think within an MTSS framework, we're talking about collaboration with Gen Ed and with Ed specialists for sure. But I think if we do sort of leave that term out in some way, I think there could be some, not pushback, but there will be some question about who is actually going to address those needs. Yeah.
And, we would assume, of course, it's
right.
going to be a partnership
Exactly.
with general educators.
Exactly.
But, I'll ask both of our experts here at the end of the table if you see
I
any
was
reason
busy
we
looking
could
up
not
a
do that.
thesaurus to see if I can find another word that means mild but is not mild. I don't have anything quite yet. I think there's a difference there between mild to moderate disabilities and mild moderate support needs. I think that is unique, and I think we could regulate it that way. I'm not really finding another term that works in mild's place, unfortunately.
all the words kind of mean, vapid, tepid. That's not what we have in mind. Not so
Erin, Kristen, any
I want
thoughts?
those.
Any other words that work other than mild that might work there for you? No?
I don't have a problem with mild. I think the biggest issue was, first of all, we're talking about level support,
Right.
Whole
So
new conversation. The second is that moderate was in both, and so that was
Right.
really sort of confusing.
Right.
And a lot of what happened was, if you're moderate to this side, you were in a special day class, and if you're moderate to this side, you may not have been. And so we want all students, I think Megan just really put it all together for all of us.
Yeah.
We just want all students to have all the opportunities possible, and we want to make sure that teachers are trained appropriately to provide, even if it's at intensive level support, in the most inclusive environment.
Thank you.
So mild's fine with us.
Thank you.
Director Sandy?
I think that's a very important clarification, that the significance in the shift here is away from disability category to support need. And it speaks to me as a novice in this field, and I appreciate every teacher who's teaching me more about how this works on the ground. That there's this continuum. There's a continuum. The standards we adopted for general education 2 years ago push inclusion intensively in that space. The expectation is that a general ed teacher in the future will be prepared to work effectively in an inclusive environment and to work with students who are in that environment, not in isolation. I think part of what we're trying to do is move away from isolation, and isolationism among teachers and isolation of students based on disabilities. That's the big shift. That's the seismic shift that I think we're making as a state. But with that in mind, this continuum of support needs will need clarification. Which of those support needs are best met by the gen ed teacher versus the mild to moderate special ed teacher versus the intensive teacher? And it may depend intensively on particulars. I think that coming to some agreement about this general frame is going to drive us then into the deeper conversations about how we define that for assignment monitoring purposes in the field. And that's really, you want to talk about the blades of grass. Now we're talking about the grains of sand that those blades are planted in. It's really critical, however, if we're going to change the culture of how we assign teachers and how we make sure that all students' needs are met across that continuum. So I think at this stage of the game, we are adopting a frame, I think, and stating very affirmatively that this is the direction we're going, with the anticipation that more definitional work will be coming and clarification will be probably several years in the making, that every situation that occurs in the field will bring another question to us that we may need to determine which side of the line does it go on with our colleagues in this. But I think we've decided to head north, not south, east, or west. We're headed north. That's the decision that's in front of you today.
Commissioner Hind?
Well, I think adding on a little bit to what you were talking about, it's also going to be what's in that student's IEP, and that conversation that's going to come out. The administrator is not just going to assign someone to work with a student without looking first at what's in the IEP and who can meet those needs. So that's important to remember too. Are we in the discussion part or not?
Actually, I was going to excuse
I will stop there.
So the public comment period for this item is now closed. And now we will move in. Commissioners, do you have any questions, comments? Okay. Commissioner Hind.
A couple questions. There's so much in here. This is, it's great. No, it's just, I'm trying to I was looking at the appendix. Okay, let me back up. When you did the colors, the blue and the purple, I'll get back to where I was at. In Appendix B, I believe. And I just had a question. When we were going through it, it was 2.5. Let me get there. All right. The blue, when it says demonstrate knowledge of the communicative intent of students' behavior, as well as the ability to help students develop positive communication skills and systems to replace negative behavior. And I think I remember correctly in your presentation that you said that was really geared towards students with autism. Sorry, it's
It's both language and academic development, and that's also autism language as well, right there. I didn't highlight in any color autism language, so blue.
That's fine. I just wanted to know where then would behavior caused from emotional disturbance go? Would that also be in that?
Again,
I didn't see a lot in there for emotional. I don't know if I saw anything that specifically called out emotional disturbance, but I did notice it in the letter that came from Ms. Gross, who also highlighted that about emotional needs. So I'm just wondering if that specific line is also covering that, or if there's a different section that I'm not looking at.
So it's here somewhere. I just need to look through them. Sorry.
That's good.
So 2.7, even 2 points. So you're looking for behavior?
I just was looking to see if when we talk about behavior in relationship to communication, if we're talking about behavior that's caused because you are unable to communicate because you have a physical disability, or if you're talking about behavior that's a result of communication you're having because you're angry or you're, you know what I mean?
So yes, so it's kind of a combination. It's 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.10. The 2.10 is really where it teases the two out. So,
Sarah, I have a question about that. I was thinking my thought was that was more about communicative competence in order to prevent behaviors. Is that right?
So as we've been working, I've had additional staff helping me look for words. And so the best that we think we've come up with, if we're going to use extensive for the moderate severe and moderate, we could have minimal. So minimal to moderate support needs. It's not great, but it's the best of all the words we've come up with. We also came up with fundamental, but I don't think fundamental to moderate works. I think it would be fundamental support needs without the moderate anymore. We're still thinking, we're working.
All right. Director Sandy?
I just wanted to draw your attention to TPE 213 that says implement systems to assess, plan, and provide academic and social skills instruction to support positive behavior in all students, including students who present complex social, communication, behavioral, and emotional needs. I think that concept recurs throughout these.
And that's in the extensive support needs TPEs, Appendix C.
Right. Oh, sorry, I was in the wrong appendix there. But it.
Moderate and 2.13 in this. Yeah, because
staff has taken a lot of time to try to build these. That what you see in the mild, in the moderate, is you see it again in the extensive, but it is at a more extensive level. So Sarah kind of knows where all those connections are.
Commissioner Strauss?
Yeah, so I just thought, I see the difference in extensive. If the commission wanted another option for the moderate, you could still do mild to moderate. Remember, we used to have mild, moderate, moderate, severe. So you could do mild to moderate and extensive. And that would show the range.
Commissioner Hind and then Commissioner Zeppo.
So what, and this is like so confusing. It's so clear sometimes and it's so confusing. But so what if you have a student who has, who's very high functioning intellectually, but has very extensive severe needs physically? Where does that go in? What category or what group, or how do you, so I'm thinking about when you're making these classes, or I guess we're trying to move away from making the classes, right? I'm super confused now.
So that would be determined by the IEP. Where is the best placement? Where's the appropriate placement for that student? And so Kristen could speak better to that. I'm jumping in, but
I think it goes back to those details about looking at that individual student and what that IEP team feels like, that level of expertise. There are students with very significant physical disabilities that do not have very extensive intellectual disabilities. So I think part of the problem in the past has been is you're qualified as something, and then that determines which. I understand that it feels a little bit squishy, but at the same time we want it to be flexible enough to really identify what the best set of skills is needed for that individual student. So
can I just add to that, which I think goes to the point that Megan was making, that there are students who may have extensive support needs of some kinds who are nonetheless properly included in the general education classroom because academically they're able to engage in that work, but they may need physical supports in some contexts that are more, so we don't want the identifications to be conflated with what the placement, the right placement for the student is, right?
So a wow and congratulations, because in June we had asked, there's lots of questions and the field needs to respond to and so forth. And in the few short months, you've done so much, and just a hearty thank you in listening and looking at the modifications. And we're coming off a high, not only what happened last week. I was with Christine Olmsted at the Better Together, where the teachers, this is in their heart and they are excited about it also in the field. And so I do think we're at the time where we're at that point to make those changes, to have the IHEs respond and implement so that the field can benefit from this. So I think we fully support the recommendations from staff. I'm hearing from the field we're also okay with mild, moderate, and then extensive. So whether it's moderate alone or mild, moderate, it appears that providers are okay with either of those options. But again, a hearty congratulations and just very excited about this.
I just wanted to clarify, because I want to make sure that I didn't say something that I didn't mean to say, and that is that that students, regardless of their level of intellectual disability, that the operationally how we're approaching each and every student is that everyone has the right to be in general education with their peers. And that the level of need that we're talking about might mean that a teacher like Megan will support a student all day in a general ed classroom if that's what's appropriate, and help that teacher to significantly modify the grade level standards. But the students that are in those classrooms are learning their grade level standards, because every single student in California has the right to learn their grade level standards. And just because they're at a certain place academically doesn't mean that they have to learn the same thing every year for 10 years if they didn't graduate in learning first grade reading. So operationally, as we're thinking about this, we're thinking about as many students that can make progress in the general ed classroom are, and there is no qualifier. You have the right to be in there, and we are bringing the level of support to you. So as we're thinking about the teachers that we're educating, that's the frame. And that if there's a situation where a child needs a smaller class size or some other type of environment, maybe part of the time or whatever, that's secondary to looking first how we support that student in their general education environment. That's LRE. So I don't know if I made that clear before, but I just want to make sure that there wasn't.
Thank you. Commissioner Greneau-Shire?
So now that we're in the discussion section, I'll just reiterate what I jumped the gun on earlier, because I was so excited about the progress that we're making. And I too want to thank the staff for their persistence and thoughtful work and for listening to the field. So Terry, can we use mild, moderate together?
I think it's possible. With the word support needs, I think it is a unique title. So it would be, we would call it like MMSN, so mild, moderate support needs, rather than MM, because everyone always puts some letters together. So I think if you were to make a motion that the title should be Education Specialist, mild, moderate support needs, and Education Specialist, extensive support needs, we could make that happen. It will not take place until the regulatory process has been concluded, which means you're going to see it at least twice more in front of you, so you can think about it again and again.
Well, I wish I could make a motion, but I do support that. And I support the focus on supporting the students and not the students' disability categories. I think we have made tremendous progress in our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody like to make Commissioner Greenough-Shire wish come true and make a motion? Okay. This is an information action item. Chair Darlene Hammond.
Okay, all right. I will make the motion. And I think we want to move. Can we move all the recommendations at once with modest amendment that we would identify mild, moderate support needs and everything else that's in the recommendations?
Thank you. Do I have a second? Okay, seconded by Commissioner Martinez. Any further discussion?
Very, very quickly, semantics. Mild/moderate or mild to moderate?
Oh, my.
I heard mild to moderate. I kind of like that.
Yeah, mild to moderate. We'll say mild to moderate. And we'll have a chance to obsess on it some more when it comes back to us.
Yeah.
So, keep thinking about this. All right.
So we'll put it up for a vote now. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Anyone opposed? All right. Motion carries. Thank you. And I think this is a great time to break for lunch. So we'll be back here at 1:15. All right, everyone, thank you for your patience and sorry about the short delay. We are on item 2D. This next item is the approval of teaching performance assessment, TPA models, for continued use in California teacher preparation programs. This item is being presented by Catherine Polster and Michael Taylor. This is an action item. Ms. Polster, will you please begin?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. We're here today to talk about the continued approval of 3 teaching performance assessment models for use in California teacher preparation programs. A lot of work has gone into implementing the teacher performance assessments in California since the original legislation was passed back in 1998. The TPA has been informally administered to candidates since the 2002-2003 program year and became a mandatory assessment in July of 2008. The original 3 TPA models were the CalTPA, the Fresno Assessment of Student Teachers, or the FAST, and the Performance Assessment for California Teachers, which was the PACT. In 2014, the 4th model, the EdTPA, was approved by the Commission. And then after the approval of the EdTPA, institutions that were using PACT transitioned either to CalTPA or to EdTPA, resulting in only 3 models seeking continued approval today. In December of 2015, the Commission adopted updated assessment design standards, which are summarized in the agenda item, and the full text is in Appendix B. And then in June of 2016, the Commission approved updated teacher performance expectations. A memo was sent to institutions in December of 2016 outlining the process and the timeline for TPA models to align to the newly approved assessment design standards and TPEs. Model sponsors were required to do 3 things. The first was to review their approved TPA model in light of the revised assessment design standards and indicate whether the model would need to be updated and to what extent. The second was to provide a timeline for bringing currently approved models into alignment and for the models undergoing significant changes to provide validity evidence for review. And finally, to provide a description of the model, including where and how it will assess the revised TPEs for the 2018-19 year when standards-aligned models must be in place.
Okay, so all of the 3 models submitted all the required information according to the timeline. And there's a table on page 5 of the item that shows each model and whether or not they had major revisions and what the status of the passing standard for that model is. So CalTPA, as you know, did undergo major revisions. You've just heard about those this morning. And as Amy mentioned earlier, there was minimum passing standard adopted in December 2017 by the Commission that would carry forward, if CalTPA is approved today, through the first operational year, and then next spring you'll be brought after a standard setting study for CalTPA, a new recommended passing standard for the revised CalTPA. EdTPA did not undergo major revisions since they were originally approved in 2014. And so the passing standard that the Commission adopted for EdTPA in 2014 would still apply to future submissions for EdTPA if it's approved today. And the FAST also underwent major revisions. They met with faculty. Again, FAST is only used at Fresno State for their programs, and had a standard setting meeting, and they've recommended a passing score, which is a minimum of 2 on each of their 10 rubrics, that would also be approved today if the Commission approves that model. We also have the TPA comparability study happening. So when funding for the CalTPA redevelopment was provided by the administration and the legislature, it included a bunch of money for an external independent investigation of the 3 TPA models. So the Commission put out an RFP for that, and HUMRO won that contract to do what we're referring to as a TPA comparability study. And the TPA comparability study is happening at the same time as this model approval process. And it's being overseen by a technical advisory committee composed of model representatives and independent assessment experts. The first 2 activities of the comparability study really get right into the information that the Commission needs to have in order to determine whether or not these TPA models should be approved for future use in California. Specifically, the first activity of the TPA comparability study is a review of the models to see how well they meet the assessment design standards. And the second activity of the comparability study was a content validity review by content experts, people in the field who are users of the models, who are scorers for each of the models, who understand them. And that group got together to review each of the 3 models back in April and put together a number of recommendations, or a number of their opinions on how well they think each of these models measure the TPEs. That meeting happened in April, as I mentioned. They were also discussed the activity 1, which was originally done by some researchers at HUMRO, but then it was brought to the Committee of Content Experts to review at the same time as the Content Validity Workshop. And the committee found that all 3 of the models sufficiently meet both the assessment design standards and measure the TPEs. Appendix A, as I mentioned, has some more detailed information about how these experts felt each of the models measures the TPEs. And in November, we're going to come back to the Commission to give you all an update on the comparability study itself, which will be at the end of the first year of that comparability study. So based on the evidence provided by the model representatives in their submissions of reports to the Commission, and based on the information obtained from the first 2 activities in the comparability study, staff's recommending that the Commission approve all 3 models for ongoing use in California. And if the Commission approves those 3 models, then staff will notify teacher prep programs about their options, and will also notify model sponsors of their approval. And that's the presentation we have for you today.
Having no public comment cards for this item, all commissioners, do you have any questions or comments? Chair Darling Hammond?
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about the upcoming portion of the comparability study, which is going to look at the comparability of outcomes. It seems like a challenging thing to do, given that they're serving different kinds of institutions and so on.
Right. Yeah, that's activity 7 in the comparability study. So it'll come at the very end, after all of the models had been updated and have been implemented with operational data. They have to collect some operational data for that. But what it'll attempt to do is to take the portions of the TPEs that all 3 models measure very well and create some common rubrics that can be used to to look at the commonalities between the three models. And the hope is that they'll actually be able to develop a specific metric by which all three scores on all three models can be compared. Now, whether or not that'll be able to happen or not, we don't know. We have to wait until we see all the empirical data on it. But that's the planned activity for the comparability.
So would they, for example, try to create a common rubric and then rescore a number of the portfolios from each of the models?
Yeah, that's
using
one
a common rubric.
That's one potential idea that's been floated for attempting to do that. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Are there others that?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the details of all the thinking that's gone into that. Like I said, that's not scheduled to happen until next year.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the plan as we understand it right now. We're hoping that and I think you can see if you look at Appendix A, there's enough of the TPEs that all three models cover fairly well, so that I'm hopeful we'll be able to do that. We'll be able to come up with a common metric for that.
It's an interesting dilemma because ideally what you'd want is to have a set of candidates
take all of them,
two of the three, and then right. Overlap and so on. Yeah. That would be an extraordinary amount of work for candidates to engage in. So I would love it if at an appropriate time you could give us a little bit more insight into the way that they're thinking to approach that.
Sure.
Because that is really the critical question. It's not a peripheral question for us.
Mm-hmm.
We want to know whether with our multiple model approach, which has some definite benefits, whether, somebody who would become a teacher through one would have a high likelihood of also
right.
either becoming or being flagged for additional work from others.
Sure.
So,
well, we'll make sure to update you with all the plans on that with as much detail as we can when we come back in November.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments from commissioners? Okay, seeing no other comments, this is an action item. Do I have a motion to approve all three proposed TPA models, the CalTPA, EdTPA, and FAST, and proposed minimum passing standards for continuing use in California educator preparation programs? Thank you. Moved by Commissioner Hartig, right? Hartwig. Okay, and seconded by Commissioner Hind. So we'll call to vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
And having another item tomorrow, but today I'll recess the Educator Preparation Committee. Thank you.
Yeah. And so I am going to recess the general session and move to the closed session. And the general session will reconvene at 8:30 tomorrow morning.